Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm, and you are watching What If Naruto was born of two worlds and feared by both. If you enjoy this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Now, wasting no more time, let's start the story.
He noticed the depressing mood of the village where he lived as he peered out the window. Outside, he observed the figures going about their daily lives, going about their routines. He let out a sigh and turned to face the room he was in, annoyed by the commotion and scuffles going on. Perhaps his sense of hearing was simply far more sensitive than theirs, but he still didn't understand how they could all tolerate the noise. The door of the room opened, and a man with his hair tied in a high tail and a scar that ran from cheekbone to cheekbone across the bridge of his nose walked in. He laughed when the thought occurred to him. Good thing he didn't tie it any higher than that, otherwise he'd look more like a Nara. The man turned to look at him, warningly, as though he could read his mind. He pretended to be uninformed and shrugged his shoulders. When he saw the man suddenly smile and raise an eyebrow, he thought, "Damn, am I getting that predictable to him?" before pressing his face into his palm. He moaned, "He seems to be reading my thoughts." After taking a deep breath, the man leaned back. The boy tried to shield his ears as best he could. Knowing what was about to happen, the man's head suddenly grew more than 5 times its normal size as he slammed his hands on the desk in front of him and shouted out all the breath he had taken. Yes, he was cursing in front of 12-year-olds, but that's nothing new these days. Will you brats shut the hell up and sit the fuck down, now? None of them were typical children, after all, with their heads slightly bent and their hands on their laps. The rowdy ones instantly stopped talking and became rigid in their seats in an attempt to reach their seats as soon as possible. The rowdy ones tripped and staggered. The silent ones, well, they just carried on with their activities. Now then, in a matter of days, your final examinations will be coming and you'll soon be graduating from this academy. Soon as you graduate, you're all going to be one step closer into becoming full-fledged ninjas, but don't think all your hard work has ended. On the contrary, the hard part of being a ninja will have only just begun now. Quick recaps. What is the purpose of ninjas? Sakura? He asked, staring straight at a girl with pink hair. It is to protect the human populace from those that abuses their powers and abilities and would threaten to endanger them, thus disrupting the balance that has already been shifty for eons. It is also to help in maintaining and improving the economy of the country a certain hidden village is sworn to watch over, also stabilizing the village in the process. She ended with a very sweet grin. The man with the scars nodded and looked around the room once more. He glanced at the boy who had the same hairstyle as him, but the boy's was tied higher and nearly atop his head. Correct. What are the various parts of the body where a precise hit would result in a certain death, Shikamaru? He asked. The boy let out a sigh and gave the man a weary, bored expression as if he were getting old and just wanted to retire. Troublesome. There are no specific areas for certain kills, because it differs for every ninja depending on their race or species. However, targets which would cause certain death for anyone are the heart and the brain for a select few. The heel is also a weakness. Some of these specific weaknesses are the face, the hair, throats, stomach, and the eyes. He concluded, his tired and bored expression never leaving his expression. The instructor merely gave a nod before continuing. Okay. Next question. What is the Hokage? The boy in the back then jumped on his table and made as much noise as he could while raising his arms in the air as though he was afraid the teacher wouldn't notice. He was genuinely interested in this question, and he is well versed in the response. The man's hand went up after he arched an eyebrow. He opened his mouth and raised his index finger, staring at the boisterous boy, now moving more energetically. The boy's lips formed a big smile, but when the man pointed to the seat in front of him and called out a name, the boy sank in his seat with disappointment and sadness and stared in horror. As if the question were too simple to be included in the review, the boy huffed, "Sasuke, answer the question." The boy sitting behind him began to grind his teeth and bury his nails in his table, scratching as his jaw tightened. The boy had insulted something he truly cared about, and he detested him for it. The boy pulled out a blank piece of paper and began planning his retaliation, thinking, "Looks like I found my new target. You'd better be as good as they say you are, Teme. I don't like it when my targets are too easy." Meanwhile, the teacher glared at the boy, who then gave his textbook response. The scarred man nodded to confirm the statement, but his glare never softened as he stared down the boy. The Hokage is the most powerful ninja in the village, not just in physical strength and ability, but in political power and mentality as well. The position is the highest rank in the hierarchy of ninjas, as well as the most respected. There is no one in the village who doesn't know who the Hokage is, be it civilians or nins, normal people or otherwise. The boy broke eye contact and looked out the window, losing some of his haughty appearance. He looked up at the boy sitting behind the Uchiha and said, "Final question for today's review, what are we called?" He called out the boy's name, Naruto. However, the boy continued to scribble on his paper, sticking out his tongue while his brows furrowed in concentration. and he was ignored as he attempted to control his annoyance. His fingers twitched. He yelled, "Naruto!" which caused the boy to sigh and set down his pen and paper with a raised eyebrow. He glanced up at him and realized right away that he wouldn't like what the boy was going to say. Yes, he did not like it. You mean other than ninjas? His class joined in his emotional outburst as he pinched the bridge of his nose and gave a low growl while some snickered and others slammed their heads against their desks. The majority of them let out loud groans. The more reserved and quiet ones simply shook their heads in dismay. He opened his eyes to gaze at the blonde child and remarked, "Naruto, you can't even be called a ninja yet, and I know you know what I was talking about." Although he liked the boy, there were moments when he was simply too much for him. The blonde sank lower in his seat like a pampered brat and pouted, crossing his arms on his chest. "Fine. Geez, Iruka-sensei, you can't take a joke anymore. We were once humans, normal at least by the standards of nature and its laws. In order for us to combat those that had paranormal abilities and powers, our ancestors too had to resort to gaining supernatural abilities as well. Dealing with yokai and other forms of spirits and entities, we became yokais ourselves, heinous by their standards. But as the line of the tainted blood continued to pass on, we became something else entirely. We are yokais, yet still of human descent, thus we were given a different title. We are the taboo of nature, the monsters of human imagination, and the things that go bump in the night, and so much more. We are called enigmas. Mysteries to humans, nature, and to all beings of the physical as well as of the spiritual world." He finished, lifting his chin in an attempt of demonstrating respect with his arms folded across his chest and his gaze shifting to meet each child's. The man gave a grim nod. "Naruto is correct. We are neither humans nor yokai, but we aren't monsters. The monsters are those who give in to their inner desires and evils, giving in to the taint of their soul and blood. They are the reason why we ninjas exist. Our yokai blood gives us power and immense knowledge of the world around us, but our human blood gives us the sense of right and wrong as well as concepts of virtues. We are a mystery to the world, a mystery even to ourselves, but that doesn't mean that we are above everything else that resides within the very land we tread." All of the children nodded their heads already as it was the first was given to them. "The difference between us and all the evils of this world, Issa," he said, turning to face a young girl seated in the rear. He waited for her to finish his hanging sentence after giving her a slight nod. With her face glowing bright red, she said softly, CC control. "Iruka-sensei." Then she buried it in her palms before dismissing the class. The teacher gave them a final glance and smiled. Leaning on his desk, he observed the kids as they prepared to depart by packing their belongings. Two figures were waiting for the others to depart. One of them was a blond boy with facial whiskers, wearing an orange jacket that was unbuttoned over a black shirt that featured the Uzumaki's red spiral printed on the chest. He bowed to the teacher and watched the children file out one by one while he was distractedly adjusting the glove he wore on his left hand over the bandages that encircled his arm up to his elbows. The young girl across the room to his right was staring at him, but he was too preoccupied with his pastime to notice her. "That blonde chick's a Yamanaka. It's too obvious. The pale blonde hair and pale blue eyes, telltale signs of their clan, a scary mix of ghost invokers as well as the homunculus of lust. They use the powerful sexual desire their targets feel when they see them, then striking fatally or using their ghost invoke techniques to gain access to the other person's mind." His blue eyes continued to move, and he snorted. Quiet and walks silently yet precisely, almost like a drone, wearing a high-collared and long-sleeved jacket that covers the lower part of his face as well as his hands, dark glasses to cover the eyes, and aburame, the embodiment of the plague of locusts, said to house the insects they use as familiars within their very body. Shino, I think, was his name. I wonder what his colony looks like, since the colonies evolve and grow alongside their host's development. Each colony is unique. He shifted his attention as he heard the loud munching of a rather round boy, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the desk while he thought intently. "Huh. Too easy. An Akamichi. Let's see, Shuza. No, that's one from an earlier generation, maybe the father of this one. Think Naruto, think, Choji. Yeah, that's it, definitely from the Akamichi clan. The homunculus of gluttony, and one of the two only pure homunculus of the deadly sins so far. Their ability grants them the ability to suck out any and all chakra around them and use it to increase their body's mass and size. And his friend is of course the homunculus of sloth, the strongest of them all. If not for their laziness, sharp and ingenious tactical mind as well as prodigious physical ability and monstrous latent talent, they would have been the strongest of all if they would actually exert more effort than what they decide is needed. So lazy they are that their ability is to control their shadows to perform various tasks for them. Such a waste. Nara Shikamaru, truly a waste. As he considered the potential that the Nara clan could easily achieve, he bit his lip. He noticed a small puppy running around the legs of the boy wearing the hooded jacket. The Houndmaster invokers, the Inuzuka clan, alongside their Shuk familiars, are also the homunculus of pride. They use their Shuk to channel the spirits of different hellhounds for battle, while their homunculus ability allows their own bodies to take on a more animalistic feature, invoking the embodiment of their clan's pride, their Ninken. Kiba and Akamaru, the name of the puppy must be referring to when he takes on his Shuk form, must still be a true pup if it doesn't have the traits of a Shuk. Yet then there are their clan friends, the Bone Thugs and Homunculus of Wrath. The Kagaya clan, a comical association of dogs and bones as well as a deadly combination. They're as efficient as the Nara Hattori collaboration. I wonder how strong Shiro could make his bones now. Last time he said they were as hard as iron bars. As the Kagaya took a rib from his side and threw it to the dog, he grinned. He glanced back at the Nara and saw a movement. He thought the Nara was going to use it to open the door when his shadow moved, but then a boy slowly emerged from the shadow. The Hattori kid, Makura, is tagging along the Nara and Akamichi again. It's weird how a lazy boy could make friends with 4 different clan members, but considering the versatility of their abilities, it does make sense. The Naras have been in teams with the Akamichis and Yamanakas, and they have proved to be quite a legendary combination. And they have been known to take on Beyond S-class missions, pairing with the Hattoris with a 100% success rate, so him making friends with them at the same time is pretty logical. He looked at the boy in the black and shrugged. The Shadow Walkers with the unique eyes, one of the 3 famed dujutsus of Konoha. They are able to melt into shadows, and even walk through a dimension inside them. Their Kagegen is what allows them to see through the darkness of that world. A world where the Naras control everything. They are also the homunculus of envy, personified by the pure black eyes that look at everything with a darkness that threatens to swallow everything up that it sees in others it cannot find within its owners. As his mind realized that the accursed Sharingan was the most sought-after dujutsu in Konoha, the Kagegen was the least desirable. He growled. He was about to leave the room when his head instantly turned to face the back of the boy he couldn't stand. The Uchiha and their accursed Sharingan. Because of their vampire descent, they think that they're better than everybody else. Mix in being the homunculus of greed, embodied by those eyes of theirs. They want everything, from powerful and unsurpassed taijutsu moves, to unrivaled and devastating ninjutsu, even claiming various impenetrable genjutsus to be theirs and theirs alone. He struggled to control his anger as it rumbled inside of him. They wanted everything too much, that idiot even went and took all the blame for himself. As he began to recall the day he lost one of his most valued people, his once bright azure eyes began to glow a bloody crimson, their pupils narrowing to form a slit. Rewind. Shortly after leaving the academy, he hurried to the Ichiraku, his favorite ramen shop there. He was to meet someone who had become his teacher, and they were to discuss the different techniques he knew, as well as what he could and would teach him, with a focus on the distinctions between the two. The people he truly loved were there to greet him as soon as he arrived and flipped over one of the stall's flaps. The elderly Tucci and his daughter Iyame were just regular people, but they didn't fear or despise him like everyone else did. They gave him a warm welcome and occasionally even served him their delectable cuisine. The elderly man occasionally added extra topping slices or flavor to his already delicious meal just for himself. He simply leapt over the counter and gave them both hugs because he loved them so much. Since he discovered the benefits of the warmth that a simple hug could provide, it had become a habit of his. After they gave him a hug in return, he leapt over the counter once more and sat down on the stool. He noticed his teacher and big brother figure to his left. He looked at the blonde with a slight, kind smile on his face and said, "Hello, Naruto-kun." He returned the smile, though it was less taciturn than the older man's. "Hello, Itachi-Nissan, did you wait long?" When Ayame brought them big bowls of steaming ramen, Naruto couldn't contain his excitement as his body trembled with each whiff of the smoke, his arm wiping the drool that was already streaming from his chin. "Nope. I was just here long enough to order our food and here they come now." Naruto decided to attack after the man broke his chopsticks. Itachi said, "Itadakimasu," in a courteous manner, but Naruto's was a slurred version. The sound of Tucci cooking, Naruto chugging and slurping, his bowl hitting the counter before a loud, "Next." And then another new order being placed in front of him were all that was heard for the next few minutes. This cycle continued even after Itachi finished his bowl. His hand started to ruffle the blonde's hair, but stopped in mid-air when a presence appeared. He simply smiled as he watched the child as the Hokage entered and took a seat beside Naruto. He realized that something significant was about to happen. He nodded slightly to him and sat up straight, focusing entirely on the strong and superior elder. It wasn't until he finished his most recent bowl and called for another that Naruto looked up, even though he had noticed the newcomer's arrival. He jumped at the man and choked him as soon as he realized it was his old man Hokage. Itachi couldn't help but smile a little when the old man laughed. Naruto decided it would be best to stop at his current bull count. After the Hokage finished ordering his own bull, they accepted the Hokage's invitation to visit his office. The powerful Nin quickly lost all of his gentleness once they were in the office and began acting solemn, though he was a little sad that the boy would be present to see him act in such a way. The man tensed up as Naruto walked around the room, examining objects that caught his attention before moving on to the next, but keeping an ear out to listen in on their conversation. "Itachi, I have read your report and it is most disturbing," the man said when the people he cared about were conversing. He was captivated. "Though I question their ideals, I have no doubt that your clan is powerful. I don't know what to do with this, Itachi. Our laws strictly forbid acting against a clan without any provocation. All we could do is prepare for what they are planning and then act on that, and even then, I don't think that the village will survive." The topic they were discussing sounded so gloomy and inappropriate that Naruto didn't like it. Itachi retorted, "What do you mean, Hokage-sama? Surely we could prevent the village from being destroyed." He was well aware that the blonde could hear, but it made no difference because he would be told about the problem later. "Indeed, we could spare the village, but the resulting civil war would destroy key infrastructures of Konoha, and I'm not just speaking of buildings and foundations," he said while massaging his temple. Itachi went on, already aware that his reasoning was correct. "The fighting would cause mistrust within our village, and because of the various homunculus here, it could spark up even more complications, not to mention all of the other hidden villages would capitalize on Konoha's weakened state." After giving a nod, the elderly man covered his face with his hands. The Hokage smiled gratefully at Naruto as he approached him and began massaging the area of his back that he could reach. "I have a suggestion, Hokage-sama." He picked up the blonde and put him on his lap, allowing him to play with the papers on the desk. All he said was, "Please, go ahead." He stopped in the middle of his sentence but quickly resumed when he noticed the Hokage about to say something. "Perhaps I could yet stop what they are planning to by more violent means." The elderly man raised his eyebrows and simply nodded. His eyes were worried, and he opened his mouth to ask a question, but the young man spoke before him. He began, then knelt down and said, "My loyalty is to the village first, and rest assured, my ability is more than enough to be able to perform this task alone. Do not worry, Hokage-sama, I am able to do it." In order to emphasize his words of self-confidence, he made the tomos on his activated Sharingan swirl and locked eyes with the elderly man. The old man looked at his face and then nodded, but he waved his hand to stop the man before he could get up to go. The young man nodded, and the old man opened a drawer and touched the crystal ball that was concealed inside. "I do not doubt your abilities, nor your loyalties, Itachi, but I believe in having a precaution to every move, especially for those that would endanger my ninjas." It glowed dimly when he applied some chakra to it. The instant he released his grip, the Anbu was at Itachi's side, already kneeling. The Anbu nodded and got to his feet, turning to face the man next to him as though he was waiting for an order to leave. "Today, you are going to be doing a S-class mission. Secrecy demanded you shall follow and assist Itachi with his mission, and you shall do it without fail or question. Hokage-sama, I have only one request. I will let my brother live, as he is still innocent and ignorant of the true corruption within our clan. All knowledge of what we have talked about shall be kept from him. Unfortunately, I don't know much about all the other kids to vouch for how they are, and I'm pretty certain it would be unwise. Toa." He exhaled deeply and pondered his phrases. "To let even the youngest child alive, they could be easily taken and used as a weapon against us. Yes, that would be quite a problem." The elderly man sighed deeply, slumping in his chair as his advanced age and the weight he was carrying left him feeling exhausted. The elderly man raises an eyebrow and looks at Itachi wearily as he asks, "And what about your brother? How are you planning to deal with him?" in an attempt to elicit an answer. The old man grinned and nodded in agreement, knowing that the young man's good intentions were genuine. "I wish for him to hate me, to hate the power of which I shall be showing him. I wish for him to despise the power that our clan possesses, and the corruption that the power of these eyes gives. I shall cleanse our world of the darkness which envelops our clan. But I do not wish for my family to die. That is all I want, and I wish you would consider this." In an attempt at humor, the old man reprimanded, "Aren't you supposed to be greedy, Itachi-san?" and was rewarded with a cunning smile. "That is why I'm taking all of the blame." The two gave a hearty laugh at that, and then their smiles gradually disappeared. "To me, it would seem like you'll be taking the credit." They only needed to give each other and the Anbu a nod in order to finalize the agreement. After giving him a quick salute, the two nins quickly fled the office. "But what about my training?" The blonde grumbled. A fresh Anbu entered his office with a tiny push of chakra on the crystal ball. Once more he gestured for the boy to approach the nin as he hefted him off his lap and onto the ground. "But old man, Itachi Nisan is way stronger than him. I could already sense it." The child-side Naruto was taken aback by the Hokage's and the Anbu's gaze, which caused his chakra and Yuki to pulse. Behind the mask, a familiar voice said, "Just because I'm not strong like Itachi-san doesn't mean I can't whip you into shape, Naruto." When the Anbu took off his mask and showed Naruto's most trusted person's signature scar, Naruto's eyes widened. "Iruka-sensei." After merely giggling at the boy's expression, the man lifted his stunned body, bowed to his leader, and carried the blonde away to train him. The Hokage grinned when he realized Naruto didn't understand what they were discussing and was relieved that he would be kept in the dark for the time being. However, his grin soon vanished when he realized that Naruto would soon learn the truth because the plan was already in motion and the mission's outcome would shock the entire ninja world because that night would mark the beginning of a new legend. Finish the flashback. That idiot. And now, all his efforts are being wasted by his arrogant brother. That asshole, that jerk, that Teme. He clenched his fist as tightly as he could, but he was too consumed with his rage to notice the blood dripping from his palm. He usually didn't notice the girl, but when he heard the sound of clambering wood from the side, he instantly pointed his glare at her terrified face. His mind was already trying to piece together the few hints he could find about her identity as he gave her a critical eye. Pale white skin, and large pupil-less eyes, a Hyuga? But that's weird the way she carries herself. It's not the way a homunculus of vanity would act, neither would a vampire. Self-consciousness could be considered a small degree of vain, which she clearly is. Let's see. His gaze moved slowly over the girl's body, oblivious to the pain and shame visible on her face. He searched and searched until he found that he was unable to identify the exact thing that was off about her. He got up to approach her, but the girl eeped and ran out of the room after he had taken just one step. It'd be an understatement to say he was shocked. It was the strangest response he had yet experienced from anyone. Usually, they would try their best to avoid eye contact or call him a monster before fleeing. The other children would either ignore him or put up with his presence. His expression remained the same as he turned to see who it was that had stifled his laughter. The man simply started laughing as soon as he turned to face his teacher. All Naruto could do was stand there with a dazed expression on his face while his mind tried to identify the strange Hyuga girl. "Oh, I think her name is Hinata. Hama." 2 days have passed and he still hasn't figured her out. 2 days have passed, and they will be taking their final exams for graduation in just a few hours. His deadline was approaching, so he growled in annoyance for what he had discovered during the final 2 days of his investigation. He swore at himself. "Why didn't you tell me about her sooner, damn demon?" A snout formed in front of his mouth, surrounded by a red aura of chakra. He cocked his head to the side, but the spectral chakra snout began to move independently rather than in tandem with his movements. "You didn't ask anything, brat. How weak and ignorant are you to not even notice her stalking you in the first place? I'll bet the entire village knew about that, even the pathetic humans." He shook his head in exasperation and tried to break the chakra snout with a palm, but it reformed after his hand passed through. "Well, considering you weren't even aware that she was using her clan's abilities only shows how far your skills go." He moaned and buried his face in his hands, not wanting to think about that. Flashback. A day before he was growing impatient, she was able to escape him despite his efforts to walk as quietly as possible, including by taking secret paths that he was certain only he knew. It seemed as though she could see right through his every action, and she didn't even need to look around to know he was there. A complaining voice murmured in his head, "Let me ask you something, you idiotic host of mine." He growled back angrily, "What is it? Can't you see I'm a little too busy here for your trivial questions?" Even though he knew the kitsune was just playing tricks on him, he was unable to control his annoyance. He rolled his eyes and asked, "Have you ever thought about what the girl could do? If I knew that, I wouldn't be doing something like this, now would I?" He growled once more as he considered what the demon might be discussing. "That's not what I meant, seriously, how stupid can you get? Think about what clan she's from." He said now that he understood what it was talking about. His eyes widened and he put a palm to his forehead. "Hyuga Byakugan." As the Kyuubi laughed at his foolishness all day, his head ached for the remainder of the day. Finish the flashback. "So, are you giving up on her? Why are you such a pitiful weakling anyways?" "I'm not giving up, we've still got a few hours left." Still trying to discover what was different about her, he whispered, stunned by the sudden action. He was drawn into his own mental landscape at that moment. "What do you mean, we?" As he turned to face the Kyuubi's cage, he noticed that the demon was low on the ground, attempting to meet his host's gaze, his curiosity evident. "Well, you need to blow off some steam, right? How does a little chase sound to you?" The shadow behind the bars began to reveal his teeth in a grin, and he grinned smugly. Well, now you've got me interested. I would prefer a hunt, but a chase would be a good enough exercise, I guess." Remember, we're chasing to capture, not to hurt her, and who knows, she might even give you a run for your money." The Kyuubi's chakra was already leaking into the child's body from the seal when he cocked his head back in laughter. The red chakra swirled around him as he stood quietly in the physical world, eyes closed and head bowed. He inhaled deeply while flexing his fingers, which had already grown into sharp claws. He cracked his neck and let out a breath through his mouth. His eyes opened, and he aimed them in the direction of the scent he had previously detected. His left eye, which had slits for pupils, was still blue as usual, but his right eye now glowed red. His smile widened, and he tapped the toes of his right foot on the tiles of the roof he was now standing on. He yelled, "Here we go!" As his voice overlapped with the Kyuubi's, he leaned forward and immediately vanished, appearing next to the figure concealed behind a street pole, as soon as he lifted his right foot off the roof and leapt with his left. Panic clouded her judgment, so she eeped and ran as fast as she could. What happened? He was just there on the rooftop, and then the next second, he was right beside me. Using her Byakugan to track her pursuer, she ran as fast as she could on the rooftop to her left. She caught a glimpse of him before he vanished once more. He looked exactly where she had been before, so she assessed his position and didn't move a second late. After turning one corner, she turned another back up to the rooftop, then on another, and then on another. She watched him dart in and out of her line of sight. When she noticed he was attempting to cut her off, she skidded to a stop and fled in the direction of the alleyway. She slipped into a corner, and he appeared where she would have collided with him if she hadn't changed course. He was on the roof in one moment, and then on the other side of the alley in another. The blonde appeared and vanished in sudden bursts of speed as she kicked off the wall and the opposite wall until she reached the roof, then ran and leapt down again into another alley. As she rounded another corner, waiting for the blonde, she asked herself, if he's so fast that I couldn't even follow his movements, why does he suddenly appear and disappear? She instantly shifted to her left. When he appeared directly behind him, he vanished once more before reappearing a few paces ahead of her, but this time he was facing her. I get it. He can't move that fast and change directions. He needs to stop first. She ran in the hopes of gaining an advantage in the forest after discovering a weakness. Knowing what she was thinking, the boy grinned. He appeared more sinister due to the Kyuubi's chakra face, which was also grinning. Huh. Now this is more like it. As he shoved the boy forward, the demon yelled. He obeyed because he didn't want to lose her, and they hurried to interrupt her. He pushed off the rooftop and lunged at her as they arrived. Right as she was entering the forest, when his hand touched her shoulder, he grinned triumphantly, but his face changed when the girl used his hand's push to spin around. She swung her hand in his direction after extending it toward a tree. He instinctively covered his face as he watched a stream of water shoot out of the tree and follow the motions of her hand, slamming into his arms and pinning him to the tree behind him. His eyes widened as soon as she halted her motion. The girl started to run into the forest, the stream of water losing strength as its volume decreased. For a full minute, he stood there looking shocked, trying to understand what she had just done. What the hell was that? I knew clan children had an advantage over others, but to think they already knew more than basic academy ninjutsu? Grabbing a fistful of his hair, he began to tug lightly while shouting. The Kyuubi shook its head, its chakra face moving from side to side. This was no ninjutsu. What the hell are you talking about? Your senses are beyond normal because you are my container, not to mention you are currently using my chakra. Even if it is a minuscule portion, then your senses should be even more heightened, and since you didn't detect a hint of chakra or even yuki from that move, then it's not ninjutsu. With his eyes fixed on the tree from which the water had spewed, he nodded in comprehension. He snapped his fingers and clucked his tongue. You got an idea, kid? Maybe, but we're going to have to confirm it with her. Let's end this chase. I'm getting sick of this guessing. I've got an idea then. Kyuubi showed him what it had in mind, looking up and looking for something, and the blonde nodded. He sent the chakra shroud around his arm up toward the highest branch it could grasp. By reeling his hand back and thrusting an open palm into the air, he clenched his fist and drew back his arm, stopping when it struck a thick branch of the tall trees. The boy was drawn up towards the chakra hand as it tightened its grip on the branch and began to contract. Using the arm as a slingshot, he let go and was launched high into the air. The boy's eyes were then engulfed in a red flame as all of the chakra from his body was directed into them. His vision became clearer, and a slight wind carried a familiar aroma to his nostrils. He looked toward the direction of the wind and caught a glimpse of a small figure not far away. With his arms already behind him, poised to fire another chakra arm, he smiled and allowed the chakra to encircle his form once more. He raised both of his hands in front of him, and the shroud moved with him, sending two chakra claws that protruded from each arm in the direction of the girl. When the second one arrived, she stepped back close to it after avoiding the first. His arms were drawn toward them, still outstretched, poised to seize her after he had tackled her. As he sped toward his target, his smile transformed into his toothy grin. "I've got you now." She was experiencing panic, but it was nothing compared to what she was experiencing now. She vowed that everything in the forest could hear the pounding of her heart. "I had just used my ability. If father finds out, he'll kill me." She wanted to cry, but was stopped by a movement in her Baikugan's vision. When she saw the arm of Chakra approaching her, she gasped. She took a step to the side, about to leave the area, but she retreated when she saw the other arm. She fell to her knees in shock and pain after bumping into the first arm and feeling its intense heat. The owner of the arms came into her line of sight and was rushing straight for her, so she stood up as fast as she could. Leaning back, she jumped and turned around in a panic. She struck him on the shoulders with the jukin after noticing that his hands were outstretched for her. His hands now fell limp and useless, and his smile turned to worry. Her eyes widened simultaneously as she came to a realization. "Oh no. I just hit him. Now he might think that I hate him or something. Wait." She noticed that his extended hands were now resting on her chest. As she glanced down at it, she tried to resist what she knew was going to happen next. As she felt her face get hot and realized she was flushed, she briefly lost control of her vision before regaining it, but it was in vain because she erupted when the boy's face was buried in her chest, sending them to the ground. After thinking, his hands, his face, he's on top of me, she succumbed to her embarrassment and passed out. In addition to having trouble breathing, he was blind. His thoughts were still processing what had transpired. Where am I? What happened?" He pushed his legs under himself to get on his knees as the memories returned. Pulling his head back, he inhaled deeply, oblivious to the slight weight his legs carried. "Damn you, Kyubi, you didn't say anything about that happening when you mentioned your plan." His face changed from its natural hue to a fiery red as he looked down and realized what a situation he had found himself in. He was standing on top of the Hyuga girl, his legs pushing hers apart until her thighs were above his, and his limp hands were still resting on her chest. Looking down on the girl, his chakra aura changed, forming Kyubi's head on top of his. As soon as he saw where they were, the demon started laughing loudly. Because his coordination was still a little off due to his nervousness, Naruto leaned back and pushed his legs off the ground, landing on his butt. Then he positioned the girl's legs more properly with his feet, then kicked and pulled his butt away from her. He turned to put his weight on his arm to stand up after regaining some control over it, but it gave way and he fell face first into the dirt as he spat out bits of dirt. The Kyubi's laughter intensified, the chakra cloak moving with each motion. "Shut up already, you jerk, and a little help here?" The Kyubi simply continued to laugh while he regained control of his chakra. The closed tenketsu was violently opened when he hurled it at the boy's shoulders and had it explode out of them. The painful process made him wince, but he could now move his arms much more freely. Even though his shoulders hurt with each movement and his movements were still slow, he could tolerate it. Rising to his feet, he approached the girl, examining her intently. Studying Yacht prize before you take everything from her, Naruto-kun?" The Kyubi teasingly burst out laughing again with a growl. The boy lifted the girl and carried her to a tree bridal style, where she was seated with her back against the trunk. After that, he went to a tree across from her and sat there, watching her intently until she came to. He ignored the remark and the chakra gradually returned to his body. "Well, what now? Are you just going to sit there and watch her? This is getting boring." "Finally, some peace and quiet now. Let's see." He kept examining every aspect of the girl, but all he could think of were the same things he had previously discovered. A Hyuga, which basically means that she's a vampire, and a homunculus of vanity. But something's off, something's different. Plus, that thing with the tree in the water, if my guess is correct, then she must be. He snapped out of his reverie when she moved, and he fixed his eyes on her face. She began to look around after blinking the haze from her eyes, but she froze when her gaze locked with his. "Hello, Hinata-chan." He smiled broadly at her, making every effort to convey that he was harmless. "NN Naruto-kun." She instantly bowed her head as her face flushed, her gaze flickering from the floor to his face and back again. He swore he could hear her teeth grinding as she began pressing her index fingers together. "Hey, Hinata, are you okay?" Why yeah. So, I have a question. Why did you run away from me that time?" Now that her hands were clasped together, she held them to her lips, biting her bottom lip as her thumbs began to draw lines. He looked to the side, chewed on his lower lip, and began to scratch his cheek with his index finger. "Are you afraid of me or something? Maybe mad at me? If you were in one of my pranks from before, I didn't mean to get you. There weren't anyone in particular I was trying to get, except for those shop owners and some other people," he said. "No, Naruto-kun. I'm not mad at you and I'm not afraid of you either. Why should I be afraid?" "Because he holds something truly terrifying, little girl. Suddenly, from his shoulder, a chakra-shaped fox figure appeared, its forelegs bent and eyes blazing with a red flame, ready to charge. Back the hell off, Kyuubi, with a roar. The boy's own chakra's blue flame engulfed him with his head cocked to the side and his eyes closed in agony and focus. He pushed the red chakra into his body as the demonic chakra began to lash out at him. He was pulled back into his mindscape as the final remnant of chakra was redirected within him. You ass. What the hell are you trying to do? Merely introducing myself, you impolite and uncultured savage. You call scaring her a proper introduction? And you call me an uncultured savage? Shut your mouth, insect. You dare to talk to a superior being in such a manner? I've got more class than you asshole, and maybe someday I'll educate you in proper manners, so you won't go acting like a wild beast again. A clawed arm reached out from between the bars of the cage, attempting to seize the boy as it rattled. With his chakra and Yuki rolling outwards like a mist, the demon roared and slammed his head against the cage's lock. His outstretched arm then clawed and smashed the area he could reach with his eyes closed and his chakra flared. Naruto approached the door of the cage and touched the paper that read, "Seal." On it the Kyuubi roared in pain and rage as he pushed his chakra into it. A moment later, the Kyuubi compelled himself to stop glaring at his host, after seeing a flash of light. You'd better behave. Kyuubi, you may be the superior being of the two of us, but you'd better not forget who among us was given control over the other. Huh? You can't control me or my power. That's right. I have no control over you or your power, but remember, your existence is under my control. Existence. Huh? What funny words you and your kind use. After making that final comment, the demon pushed the boy away and returned to the real world, turning his back on his captor panting. He collapsed on his arms. It's difficult to act tough around people who are stronger than you, but it was nearly impossible to act tough and try to prove who your boss was to someone who was generations above you. Naruto-kun, are you alright? To his surprise, she was standing next to him when he turned to face the voice with a feeble nod. He forced himself to sit, resting his head and back on the trunk. Sorry about that, the demon trying to scare you. With a slight nod, he gazed off into space. I wasn't afraid, Naruto, only surprised. If the Kyuubi is the only reason why I should be afraid of you, then I should be afraid of everyone in our class, alright? He said. Hinata, what are you? He asked. Observing her startled expression, he struggled to recover from the situation, mentally cursing as he gained control. I didn't mean to say it in an offending way. I mean, there's just something about you that seems different. Well, Hinata. He took a step toward her and looked directly into her eyes. Because they were so close, he could see that her eyes were a light lavender color rather than the white of the other Hyuga. His suspicions increased, and the assurance in his voice demonstrated how certain he was of his assumption. Her face began to contort into a tangle of fear, anxiety, and panic. You're not of full Hyuga, are you? She asked, taking her by the shoulders. He looked at her with all the warmth he could. Her face flushed and she turned to face the ground, her bangs hiding her eyes as she said, Hinata, there's nothing to worry about. I won't tell anyone your secret. I just want to know more about you. She then looked up at him and smiled warmly at him, something that only a few people do. Oh, okay, Naruto-kun, I trust you. He turned to face the ground, trying to conceal the feelings he was unable to conceal: surprise, happiness, worry, disappointment, and fear. After clearing his throat, he put on his typical joyful mask. So, Hinata-chan, are you somehow part nymph? He finally asked, his eyes gleaming with sincere curiosity and interest. The Hyuga was enthralled with the gleam in his eyes and was unaware that it had been luring her in since they had first spoken. Her face bringing itself closer and closer to his smile was infectious, and she couldn't help but laugh. In a moment of genuine joy, she reached absently for the whisker lines on his face, only to regain consciousness when his eyes widened at the unexpected touch. After separating from him, she gave him a brief, pitying smile before responding to her query. Why, yes, Naruto-kun, my mother is a nymph enigma. She studied his face, unaware that his smile could get any bigger. He got up, brushed himself off, and reached for her hand to help her stand, saying, I knew it. Thanks, Hinata-chan. You should probably start heading for the academy. It's almost time for class. What about you? Naruto-kun, I sort of still have something to deal with. In an attempt to conceal the serious expression on his face, he had turned his head away from her when he said that he had once again put on his happy mask when he turned to face her. Well, Hinata-chan, see you later in class. Good luck on the exam, alright? Do your best, you're sure to pass it? After finishing, he turned and leapt as high as he could, kicking off the trunks of trees in his immediate vicinity until he reached a branch. He landed in a crouch after flipping on top of it, about to jump off when someone yelled at him to stop. Naruto-kun. He turned to face the ground and noticed Hinata's anxious expression. It was still loud enough for his sensitive ears to hear, but her voice had begun to get softer with each word. Please don't tell anyone of my secret. Especially the thing earlier with the water. He grinned and said, don't worry Hinata-chan. You're my enigma, I won't let anyone else know about you. He noticed how quickly her expression changed from one emotion to another, and he was no longer sure which was which. He waved and jumped away, attempting to decipher the expressions on her face. Grateful was the first one, along with a trusting look, then shock, and then embarrassment? I don't get it. So, she's your enigma oh, so now you're talking to me again? I'll forgive your insolence for today. After all, you have proven this little chase to be quite entertaining. He brought to mind the memories Naruto had been trying to hide, laughing aloud to himself in his cage as the boy became so agitated that he almost missed the next branch. Damn you Kyuubi, was all he could mutter in annoyance as he recalled how her chest felt like it filled his hand. After all, he still felt his limbs even though he lost control of them. While this was going on, Hinata was walking in a daze, her mind racing with various ideas about her rather hectic day. He called me his enigma. I know he meant that I was a mystery to him, and that he wanted to be the one to figure it out, but he called me his enigma, and he wanted to know more about me. She kept thinking about the same thing until she caught a glimpse of his shadowed figure in the distance. He was on his way to the Hokage Tower from a roof. So that's where he has something to deal with? When he told her that, she recalled how he averted his gaze. The change in tone and the seriousness and urgency of his words were almost palpable to her. She observed him using his right hand to trace a line on the palm of his gloved left hand. Observing that it was more of a habit than an intentional action every time he had something to ponder, she knew he would be doing that. She had repeatedly used her Byakugan to try to see what was underneath the glove, her curiosity getting the better of her since the glove contained a sizable collection of Yuki. She had long suspected that it was some kind of limiter. When she took another look, she tried not to show him how surprised she was. The quantity of Yuki it contained was greater than the last time she had seen it. Furthermore, it had two distinct Yuki signatures and now displayed a clear distinction from the Kyuubi's Yuki that was sealed inside of him. Now she was positive it was more of a seal than a limiter. A curse then, but there are only a few curses that strong, Naruto-kun. Is that why they all consider you a demon, even in a village full of monsters? His heart was beating so hard that it felt like it might burst from his chest. His jaw tightened as his anxiety increased. Why does it always have to be at this time? He searched for something that was not yet visible by looking up at the sky. The object whose existence drew him in was the only thing on his mind as his eyes darted from cloud to cloud. Naruto. He heard the voice, but it didn't seem significant to him. His feet were scuffing restlessly beneath the table, and he was breathing a little hard. Naruto. He snapped his head in the direction of the voice. It took a few moments for his mind to catch up as he glanced from one end of the room to the other. He got up from his chair and began to walk toward the front. Swallowing the lump in his throat, he took one slow step after another, and the walk seemed to go on forever like he usually does. He wanted to jump, to go from his seat to his destination in one bound, but he knew better than to try to use his unsteady body. When he arrived at his destination, he struggled to stay upright and spun around to face the other students. He noticed that his classmates were staring at him strangely, and he understood why they had never seen him like this before. His fingers were twitching and fidgeting, he was sweating profusely, and he exuded an uneasy aura. Most of his former classmates assumed that he was anxious because of the final exam, but they knew better than to assume that he was experiencing anxiety over something so academic. He turned to face the voice's owner and noticed the concern on the scarred man's face. Naruto. Are you alright? He asked. He was aware of his situation and that the man would stop him from taking the test if he continued to express discomfort. He forced a smile, which was much harder than usual because of his current uneasiness. The man had a doubtful expression, and he was aware that he didn't believe it. Are you sure you're alright, Naruto? Iruka, I think we should let the boy rest for now. He can always retake the testa. No. Both heads jerked toward him, their eyebrows raised and eyes wide as they expressed surprise at his outburst. In order to relax, he inhaled deeply. He put on his mask once more and said, Sorry, Mizuki-sensei, I didn't mean to shout. I meant to say, I'm good to go for the test. He felt more relaxed after taking his calming breaths earlier. The boy raised an eyebrow at the question and crossed his arms, saying, Okay then, you know what to do, I presume. And what are you implying, sensei? The man asked, glancing at the clipboard in his hand before heading to his seat, ready to begin the assessment. I wasn't implying anything. Naruto Basics Transformation, Substitution, and Clone, can you do it? Before vanishing in a puff of smoke, the boy raised his chin in outrage. All that remained of him after the smoke cleared was a clipboard. Iruka glanced at both the one on the floor and the one in his hand. When the clipboard he was holding poofed into the blonde child, he gestured to stand but stopped. Is that good enough, sensei? He asked, grinning like a fox. Then the man caught him by the leg and held him by the ankles, upside down, high in the air. Hey! Cut it out! Stop manhandling students, damn it, he swore, silently cursing his short extremities as he attempted to grab the man's arm. Before dropping him on his head on the floor and stooping to retrieve his clipboard, the man said, "That's what you get for showing off." His co-teacher gave him a funny look as he returned to his seat and began to scribble. The nin with light blue hair remarked, "Looks like you're trying to show off too, huh, Iruka-sensei?" The scarred Chunin defended, saying, "Wah, Mizuki, you know I was just teaching him a lesson?" Iruka's face turned red as the man laughed and said, "Sure you were, Iruka-sensei." The man dropped the object he was holding and folded his hands on the desk in front of him, waiting for him to continue. "Whatever, all right, Naruto, last one, try to make at least one clone, but it would be preferable if you were able to make 3. His heart had begun to race once more. He was struggling most with the clone technique. Out of all the fundamentals, normally, he could create one clone, but it would take him at least a minute, and he already knew from experience that it would be disastrous in his current state. He clenched his fingers into his cross seal, gritting his teeth and closing his eyes tightly as he shaped it. He began to pour chakra into the technique, separating the Yuki from the pure chakra. He didn't need the strength that the Yuki required, and it would only serve to bring about calamity in his current state. He continued to shape it until it was just right for the technique to function sufficiently, stopping once it had enough for 3. Now that the jutsu was prepared, he grinned and called out the name to let the 2 teachers know he was ready to begin. Clone technique. The thing he feared came into play as soon as he said the first word: fighting control with the Kyuubi's Yuki and his own Yuki-tainted chakra. The Yuki he had sealed in with his glove pushed at him and leaked a little. He managed to keep it in check by pushing it back into the seal, but as his concentration on his technique waned, his ability to control his pure chakra deteriorated until he lost it completely. His chakra poured more and more into the technique that had not yet been activated before he let it out in a panic. He attempted to reshape the chakra so that he could still use the jutsu, and eventually he executed the technique. He kept his eyes focused on the cloud of smoke that erupted next to him. What he saw after the smoke cleared was a manifestation of his feelings, with the exception of being so deflated that it was lying on the ground over his sandals. The clone bore a striking resemblance to him. He had a "you know what happened" expression on his face as he gazed expectantly at Iruka. Mizuki's expression was, "I'm sorry, Naruto. You were so close." While the man's was, "I know, but I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do, look." He covered his eyes with his palms and leaned his head back. He heard Mizuki try to persuade Iruka to pass him, but he knew that even if he did, it wouldn't be right because he knew too well how a failure like that would cost him his life in a time when he needed it most. As the man dismissed the class, he clenched his jaws and balled his hands into fists. A few hands landed firmly on his shoulder, shaking slightly to express sympathy and sorrow for his plight. Although he was unable to see them, he was already aware of who his friends were. After inhaling deeply, he left the room and made his way to his swing under the big tree by the academy's gate. All of his classmates had already been picked up by their parents or guardians, leaving him alone once more. When he looked up after hearing a rustling above him, he saw a certain light blue-haired Chunin grinning down at him. "Hey Mizuki-sensei, what are you doing there?" he asked, not particularly interested in the man's motivations but aware that he ought to be doing so out of courtesy. The man lowered himself to his side and smiled at him. The same smile Naruto knew too well to be a mask, silently boasting about how much more natural looking he could make it. He gave the man his own. He frowned and said, "I'm sorry about you not passing, again." The man just laughed. At least he was sincere when he laughed at his response. He then observed that the man's heavy sigh was too deep and exaggerated to appear genuine. "You know, Iruka-sensei is only trying to look out for your own good when he failed you. Naruto, it might not be obvious, but I think you're his favorite among all the classes he's taught." He was already attempting to decipher the man's meaning when he thought, "It's only not obvious to those who are oblivious." He appreciated that the man was making every effort to hide his negative feelings, but he had a gut feeling that he shouldn't trust him, and he was positive it wasn't the Kyuubi. "Well, okay, the Kyuubi is telling me the same thing too, but there's definitely something in me that's agreeing with the demon. Listen, Naruto, I know what you really are." He was thumbing the deep nooks and crannies of the engraved seal in the leather when the man took his arm and began to think Yuki, and the Yuki sealed underneath began to stir when the man laced his own chakra on his finger as he stared at the man with wide eyes. He withdrew his hand from him and began to soothe the already agitated energy. Panic confused his thoughts, preventing him from finishing his sentences. What are you? How do you? The village would despise the man even more if he knew what was sealed in his left hand. The man's grin was now more genuine, with excitement in his eyes. Oh come on Naruto, it's not really difficult to see who your father is, and knowing how great and powerful the man is, it's easy to put two and two together and figure out something as simple as what is sealed under that glove of yours. With a look of relief on his face, Naruto released the breath he had been holding without realizing it. Why do you hide it? Why do you keep it sealed? You know that what you got from your father is what one could call true power, right? I'm sure that's why it's trying to undo the seal you had made on it. It's too strong to be held in by something weak like that. Then, as he examined his glove, his mind began racing once more. He was aware that he would eventually have to confront what it concealed. But was what Mizuka was saying accurate? How long before the seal could contain it? If it was? Once more, his thoughts prevented him from seeing Mizuki's progress, and he put a hand on his shoulder and squeezed it tightly. Listen, I know a scroll that has something more powerful than that seal of yours. It could block it out forever, or it can even introduce it to your body slowly and gradually. If you manage to get it, then I'll do whatever I can to ask them to give you a special test, and then, you would easily pass it because you won't be worrying about the sudden push of your other Yuki. His eyes were full of hope as he gazed into the man's eager, excited eyes. He searched endlessly, but he was only able to uncover something he was attempting to conceal, not any evidence of a lie. He asked the man what was on his mind, growing suspicious. Why are you helping me? The rest of the village hates me because of my circumstancia. As he explained his reasoning, the man leapt to his feet, arms out to the side. The village people are fools to hate you. But they are correct in fearing you, Naruto. Once your potential has been unlocked, and your true strength realized, then no one could keep you from what you want. They should be worshipping you instead of pushing you away. He said. Naruto knew what the man wanted with that brief statement. He wants the power that could potentially destroy this world. His tenant was complaining in the back of his mind, and he knew he wouldn't like what he heard. I would be lying if I said that I wouldn't want my power, and admitted, brat, you like the strength I give you. He spoke, felt the demon retreat back into his cage, and decided to watch for the time being. There were truths in what the Kyuubi said, but he didn't understand one thing. Finally deciding to follow the man's plan for the time being, he shook his head and concentrated on the man in front of him. Why is the Kyuubi keeping silent about the seal? I thought he didn't like sharing a body with another Yuki? He asked. He grinned because he wouldn't allow himself to be used as a puppet by a man like him, and he too had a secret agenda. So, where's this scroll you mentioned, Mizuki-sensei? The man turned to head toward the location he and Naruto had established. Grinning, he learned everything he needed to know from the small assembly the Hokage had called. Everything was proceeding as planned. He pushed his feet to move more quickly after concentrating on his senses until he was certain that he was the only one approaching the area. Soon, I'll have power that everyone will respect. Accompanied by two of his most trusted Anbu, the Hokage made his way to the tower. From a distance, he could tell that Mizuki had a secret agenda. The man was undoubtedly only close to mid-level at best, and his very presence at the meeting he had called was suspicious because only high-level Chunin and above were required. While the two waited outside the door, he went to his office. He filled the crystal ball of the Hokage with chakra. When he heard his Anbu guards whispering outside, he lost focus. I wonder how an academy failure managed to overpower the most powerful shinobi of the village. Shush. What do you think you're asking about? The boy has the Kyuubi's power at his disposal. Huh. Like he'll pull that beast out to sick onto the Sandame. I know the boy respects the man, loves him even. Hey, you're right, maybe he managed an ambush? PFT. Not even the Sannin could ambush the god of shinobi. Now that I think about it, you do have a point. How did the kid manage it? The two outside loudly clicked their heels together as he coughed, signaling to him that they were standing attentively. The old man's head was slightly bowed, the front tip of his hat casting a shadow over the upper half of his face as he attempted to conceal his embarrassment, but they couldn't see it because they were outside. He thought, I hope the boy wouldn't brag about how he beat me, as the smoke swirled inside the crystal ball, reminding him of one of his most humiliating losses. Flashback. He obstructed Naruto's path. He was aware of Naruto's trespassing, but he could still hear the blonde child's footsteps even though he was unaware that the child had entered his home. The boy stood watching the older man's form, his body tense, his senses sharply focused as he put the pipe in the inside pocket of his robe. The boy jumped back, and he laughed. After a few puffs, he finally spoke to his small intruder. Now Naruto, to what do I owe a visit from you at such an hour? Last time you came in here this late was when you had a nightmare. Shut up, old man. I wasn't scared. I just thought you needed some company at the time. The young man's outburst made him laugh once more. Looks like the boy just needs someone to talk to after his fight. His thoughts came to a halt when he noticed the hostile aura emanating from the boy. He sensed that the boy was beginning to summon the power of the demon as he continued to puff on his pipe. His smile turned into a frown. The man's eyes widened and his jaw fell when he said, "Sorry old man, but you're going to have to give me the scroll you keep hidden in your study." His pipe would have fallen and clattered noisily on the floor if it weren't for the hand holding it while he was puffing. "How did you?" The man put the pipe end back into his mouth and waited to see what the boy had in store. "It doesn't matter how I knew about it, old man. Why'd you hide it from me?" "Never mind, just get out of the way, or else." "Or else what, Naruto?" the boy asked, crossing his fingers into a Jinchuriki-only seal as his arms came together in front of his chest. Now the evil chakra wrapped itself in a cloak and he stiffened. "Or else, you're going to see the true form of the Nine-Tails Biju." He grinned mischievously, his grin more fox-like than usual as the chakra cloak caused his whisker marks to thicken and darken. "Naruto, don't be careless now," he said, reaching for his special bracelet's lock. The boy would require all of the power he had stored up if he were to unleash the Kyuubi. Now, as the cloak around the boy's head rose and took the shape of the Kyuubi's head, roaring with rage, the red chakras swirled around the boy. Now, he felt a battle about to start, and his body was tense as his senses became more acute and vigilant. The blonde was about to unfasten the lock when a puff of smoke surrounded him, but it was swiftly pushed away by a fluffy tail. He was about to undo the second and last lock after unclasping the first one when he froze, completely taken aback by the figure before him. Well, the boy had employed a transformation technique, but to assume that he would be talking about that form was absurd. 8 bushy tails swayed behind the figure of a woman, a very attractive and well-endowed woman whose curves were simply too perfect to be of a real human, while fox ears covered in fluffy red fur pointed upward. The sense of danger did not cause his already pounding heart to go into overdrive. The woman came slowly toward him, her hips purposefully swaying from left to right, her tails flowing with her every step, and her clothing that cinched her body tightly and exposed so much cleavage that he was certain it stopped exactly where it should have been hidden. It seemed as though she was getting what she wanted, almost exposing everything before stopping to reveal nothing. Her red eyes gleamed with lust and malice. Her mouth curled into a seductive smile as she bit her bottom lip, and her movements were assured and full of certainty. He was now certain that this was the Kyuubi in its Hera human form and not Naruto. She exuded a playful demeanor that only a demon fox could manage. His skin tingled with pleasure as her smooth and silky skin touched his, and her thin hands took hold of his and led them to her hips. Now, as he struggled for every breath, his mind raced because the battle he had assumed was about to begin was something else entirely. Her arms crossed behind his neck after her fingers moved up his arm to his shoulders and then up and around his neck. She drew nearer to him, her eyes slowly closing as her tongue slowly licked her upper lip. His heart was now racing in his chest, and he swallowed hard, not knowing how much more his poor heart could handle. She pressed her soft gifts against his body, and he used his hands to push her away, but it was too late. "They're so soft, they feel so real." His body finally gave in. After that, his nose exploded with blood. Pushing his head back, he fell in on himself after his knees gave out. His nosebleed became a major annoyance as his heart pumped blood too quickly, turning his entire world black. The last thing he saw was the woman squeezing her gifts together and hugging herself while bending over to give him a cheeky smile. He smiled foolishly as he blacked out. Finish the flashback. The memory made his blood race again, and a tiny trickle trickled down his nose, causing him to cough again. When the crystal ball eventually cleared to reveal the desired image, he wiped it quickly as the circumstances that would reveal Naruto's latent power developed. He sat and observed. "Ah! That lying son of a bitch!" From somewhere up ahead came a shout. He pushed his feet more quickly in the direction of the shout because he recognized the voice. The boy he was searching for was cleaning up when he staggered into a clearing and threw the rolled-up scroll onto his back after locking it. "Naruto! What in Kami's name are you doing with that scroll?" he yelled as he approached the blonde, but he had to back off when the boy turned to face him. His blue eyes were glimmering with rage and hatred like sapphires. His lips were pulled back in a snarl that revealed his long canines, and Yuki were rolling off his gloved hand in waves. He looked up at the sky, but the tall trees obscured his view, so he cursed, "Something's not right, don't tell me." The boy gave a low growl and returned his focus to the blonde. He held up his hands to reassure the boy that he meant no harm, saying, "Naruto, easy, calm down, I'm only here to help." He eased his shoulders and stepped back once more. The boy lost his snarl but kept his eyes on Yuki when he saw the man back off. "Come on Naruto, you know I won't do anything to hurt you." He and the boy were both aware of another presence when they heard footsteps on wood. They both turned to face the figure perched on a thick branch and said, "Hurt him? Huh, not likely. Forget about him Naruto. He can't hurt you, he's only afraid you'll hurt him." He was upset that the man had used his power obsession on a student of his student, Naruto, and yelled, "Mizuki! What are you scheming?" The man was enjoying it even more. His wide smile reflected the madness that afflicted the man's mind, and he had a crazy expression in his eye. His eyes widened as memories of his resentful self came flooding back. "Me? Scheming? Huh? Wasn't it you who were scheming when Naruto first came to the academy?" he asked. "Stop it, Mizuki." He stepped in the direction of the man, but the boy gave him a fierce look, and he stopped. "Damn it Mizuki, don't do this." "What, you don't want your favorite student? How much like the village you once were? How you hated and feared him because of his hidden power? How you followed every plot the elders had for him to the letter?" With his own Yuki already seeping all over his body, the man let out a loud cackle when he saw the boy's eyes, which were first filled with shock and pain before shifting into understanding and then back into the mixture of hate and anger. His heart broke. "Shut up Mizuki. Naruto, listen." Whatever he was about to say was cut off when the ground exploded in front of him, pelting his body with enormous rocks and forcing him back toward a tree. He could just make out Naruto's face change back to one of shock from behind the smoke, coughing as the force of his body colliding with the rocks and the tree caused more damage because he was not yet ready. He leaned on the trunk of the tree he was pushed against. He could already see Mizuki's face morph into his Yukai form as he looked up at him, his hands glimmering with a greenish flame. The atmosphere around them became thick and tense as the boy's Yuki suddenly shot up as his form shook. "Don't listen to him Naruto, he's just someone who wants to prevent you from realizing your full potential. I'm the only one who wants to help you. Even the senile old man of a Hokage is trying to hold you back," it said. With a lace of venom, he said, "You hurt Iruka-sensei and badmouthed my old man. I knew you weren't someone to be trusted." His lips were once again drawn back into a snarl. As he prepared his arms, Mizuki screamed back, "What are you talking about? I'm the only one who respects your power." The green flame surrounding his hand was glowing an even sicker shade. Meanwhile, the Yuki from the gloved hand was gradually consuming Naruto's left arm. The boy screamed back, "You respect my power, but they respect me." His rage sent an outburst of Yuki and chakra, lifting rocks into the air and sending wild winds swirling around them. Iruka directed his Yuki into his hand and changed it into its Yukai form. The flesh concealed beneath a greenish fur, fingers lengthening with sharpened nails at the tips to prevent himself from being blown away. He pushed it hard into the ground and used it as an anchor. He noticed that despite their thick trunks, the big trees were bending when he looked up, demonstrating the force of the winds Naruto was creating. In his awe and amazement, he overlooked the item he had previously been looking for. There was a rumbling, and he turned to look at his pupil. A different Yuki and red chakra emerged from the blonde's body. Encircling him like a cloak, it protruded well above his head, taking the shape of a fox's head, arms, and torso from where he stood. The demon's voice could be heard over the howling winds. "Brat. Calm the fuck down. Shut up." The blonde's gloved hand went up to cover his face, and he fell to one knee. Iruka could just make out the hand's elongating nails, which threatened to tear through the glove as one hand attempted to push the chakra hand away from the boy's face. The other grasped the boy's head as Naruto's annoyance increased. Another distinct Yuki pushed from the glove. The two distinct Yuki from the seal then worked together to push Kyuubi's away, shattering the chakra cloak before being pushed back into his own cage. The Kyuubi could only roar out. He changed his other hand and thrust it in front of his right, slowly clawing his way towards Naruto as the boy's body stayed motionless in the face of the blowing winds. Three different Yuki vying for supremacy. "This is getting dangerous, I have to do something," he exclaimed. The sound of the Yuki clashing shook the entire village awake. When the adults recognized two of the Yuki, they were filled with fear. They could only hope that the third Yuki was not as frightening as the first two. Youngsters, who were not yet accustomed to feeling such a powerful and sinister sensation, sobbed as they experienced the fear of the powerful Yuki. The Yuki set was too dispersed to serve as a beacon, so the ninjas frantically searched for the precise location of the scene. Both Genins and academy students simply gritted their teeth and fought back the tears as they struggled with the unease that the immense amount of demonic energy brought to them. There were only two other people who knew something about what was going on. Hiruzen propped his elbows on the desk and concealed the frown on his lips with his hands clasped together, saying, "So, the trial can no longer be delayed. Minato, if your child's suffering isn't enough to be your anchor, then may his cries of pain and troubled mind draw you back." He could only watch and wish that Naruto, who was so young, could survive such a significant transition. He bemoaned the fact that he was too well known to move to his aid because doing so would only attract more people to the boy at this precarious and vulnerable moment. The boy's agonizing cries and anguished eyes were visible inside his crystal ball, and his hands trembled as he tightened his hold. Tears were already starting to form in the corners of his eyes as he bore the agony of witnessing the boy's suffering. In a cold sweat, the girl awoke. Ever since Yuki leaped off of Naruto's seal during his final test, she has been feeling very uneasy. As soon as class ended, he wanted to speak with the blonde, but her father had arrived on time as usual to pick her up as she left his dejected and lonely form on the swing. All she could do was stare at him with sorrowful eyes. Her heart pounded, and she gripped her chest. She felt the familiar sets of Yuki and snapped her head in the direction of the window. He had always tried to catch her with one of them. Kyuubi, the demonic energy leaking from the sealed hand, was the other. When she felt a different Yuki, one she didn't recognize, she hurriedly snatched up a robe and wrapped it around herself as she left her room. She noticed that everyone in the clan compound was in a panic. She could tell from all the shouting and confusion that the Byakugan was becoming useless due to the shroud of Yuki that engulfed the entire village. Even though all the capable nins were moving out to assist in the search for the cause of the disturbance, she attempted to activate her eyes, but was blinded by the intense light from the chakra-laced Yuki surrounding them, so she turned it off. Kill the source of this disturbance. Whoever or whatever that demon of a monstrosity is, it is a danger to this village. She now understood why they referred to him as a demon, a monstrosity, and a knot formed in her throat. She began to shake because of the combination of this Yuki, which was genuinely frightening and dangerous. She trembled as she sobbed, but she wasn't sure if that was because she was crying or because she was afraid. For the moment, she did what she knew was right. She took off running. She sprinted in his direction. A tug tugged at her, and she knew she was on the right track. She knew how to find him because it felt like the center of her existence was there. Images of the blonde raced through her head, his joyful smiles, his soft, bright eyes, the dignity with which he carried himself in the face of discrimination and scrutiny, his sadness, the lonely expression in his eyes as he observed families enjoying their days out, the desire in his heart that she could sense, and his somber expression each time he traced the lining of his glove's seal. The plethora of emotions she experienced broke her heart. She was afraid of the blonde's secret. She was disgusted with herself for even for a moment believing that Naruto was a demon. She was saddened by the thought of what would happen to him now that the curse had been lifted, and finally, she was afraid for the blonde because she kept picturing her clanmates repeatedly hitting her with deadly blows. Since she knew her clan all too well, she was aware that they would continue to lash at him until he broke or died. She wiped away her tears and closed her eyes. Her eyes were as full of love for the mysterious blonde as they were full of determination when she opened them. Naruto-kun is in danger. I need to help him. I won't let anyone hurt him. I may not be certain of what I am to him, but I know for sure what he is to me. He is my enigma. The water began to swirl into a whirlpool as she gestured to the garden pond that her mother had tended. The Yuki mixture of vampire kin and the homunculus of vanity encircled her body as she relaxed her senses and let her vampire blood flow freely. The water pushed her to stay above it when she stepped on top of it, preventing her from sinking. Lilac orbs were visible when she opened her eyes, and her hair was getting longer as it seemed to float in midair and move like water. Her fangs lengthened and she opened her mouth, feeling the strength her vampire blood gave her. She arched her back as her body changed to invoke vanity. Her pale skin turned a smooth, silky marble white, and her figure grew more slender. Her robe appeared more like a small jacket, and her sleeveless nightgown, which had once hung well below her knees, now appeared to be a very short skirt. As she grew taller and some parts of her body gained mass, she gestured for the water to approach her with her now long, slender fingers, which had long nails that served as claws. The water whirled around her as she screamed for assistance. In a whisper, her mouth opened in a little groan as she closed her eyes and lifted her hands above her head, relishing the sensation of cool, revitalizing water on her skin. With the Hyuga Eris gone, she opened her chakra-glowed blue eyes and whispered to the wind in a melodic voice before the water encircled her in a spinning dome and broke into tiny droplets. Wait for me, my dear Naruto. Let it drip. When the blonde gradually opens his heavy lids, he discovers that he is in the forest and not at the clearing. His voice, which alternates between low whispers and loud shouts at random intervals, reverberates around him, asking, "What the hecka, where am I?" In an attempt to pinpoint his precise location, he turns his head left and right, observing that even his movements felt heavy. His face only displayed the worn-out, drowsy expression he had had since waking up, regardless of whether what he saw startled him or not. A blackness that seemed to go on forever stretched out around him. The lining of light that appeared to have wrapped around his form allowed him to see his body, which was the only thing that ruled out blindness. Attempting to get to his feet, He rolled onto an elbow and gazed down at the darkness. He believed that he had been lying down on the floor or some other surface when he became aware of this location. He discovered, however, as he looked around, that he was truly floating on nothing but the dark. Despite feeling as though his body was as light as a feather, he cautiously stood up after examining his surroundings and realizing that his movements were not only heavy but also somewhat sluggish. Additionally, he became aware that although his movements had been slow, it seemed as though his vision was somewhat delayed. It appeared as though he was watching the world frame by frame because his hands would already finish the movements, but the images were moving slowly, as though his brain was struggling to process the images his eyes were sending it. He began to move around in the dark, fighting the impulse to lie down again. He appears to be getting along just fine in spite of the absence of a floor. This is weird. He ignores the echoes and keeps gazing around, searching for any hints as to his location. As he continued, two big eyes behind him opened to observe. His eyes dart around the darkness, searching for his watcher, but he stops when he feels the chill of someone watching him. After taking a deep breath and failing to find anything, he slowly tilts his head sideways in an attempt to peer over his shoulder. However, the big eyes close entirely before his eyes can see them. Vanishing into the night, he takes a few steps forward, blinking slowly but keeping his eyes on the area behind him, and then looks forward again. Nothing changes even though he shakes his head to try to get rid of whatever is preventing him from thinking more clearly about his predicament. Both his body and his thoughts still have the impression that he was submerged. The sluggish movements despite the lightness he feels in his body, the fluctuating intensity of the echoes, and that constant dripping sound are all contributing to his disorienting slowness of sight, even if you ignore the haze the darkness brings. A red light appears in the distance. As he looks off, he begins to approach it, and to his amazement and surprise, even though he has only just taken a single step, the area with the red light appears in front of him. He was facing a hallway with pipe-lined walls, a ceiling, and a floor that led directly to a doorway leading to what appeared to be a sizable room. He closely examines the source of the odd light that creeps along the ceiling, floor, and walls. They resembled tentacles, but he was unable to identify the source of the light because it was encased in a red glow. Artailsa. He begins to blink, the fatigue from his eyes as he looks at the tails. He became more and more engrossed in those red lights the longer he stared. They feel a warm I think I know. A low growl from behind him stopped him as he reached for the glowing wires that he recognized. He turned around and looked around to see if anything was there, but the more he stared into the darkness, the heavier his body and eyes felt, long and hard. He stares until, just before two huge yellow orbs appear in front of him, another growl erupts from the darkness. It takes him a long time to realize what he was staring at because of his addled state. Isa. Before he can see them clearly, the two orbs begin to shimmer. Big eyes as tall as he was, with black pupil slits and yellow irises, peered up and down at him before mimicking his drowsy and bored expression. He briefly closes his own eyes and opens them to discover that the eyes in front of him have vanished when the big eyes open to reveal images from somewhere else. He tilts his head sideways in awe and takes a step forward, as though it were a window that would allow him to see where he was before going black. His expression was one of boredom and indifference, and he blinked slowly, as though the scene before him had no significance or connection whatsoever to him. He is shaken up by another explosion near him from his left, and he tightens his hold on the mass of earth that serves as his anchor. He looks up at his insane friend, while another blazing flame is thrown, this one filled with explosive Yuki. In an attempt to move himself out of his current position, he transforms his other hand and drives it deeply into the ground while cursing. That Mizuki. He's not even trying to aim at anything, just throwing out his explosives and letting the wind pick them up and scatter them all over the place. He grits his teeth and tries to fight back, but again he is unable to use his special ability. After all, his student could be harmed by a single, minor error. As the winds carry another flame in his direction, his eyes enlarge. Panicked, he lets go and tries to jump away, hoping the winds will carry him away from the explosive hurtling toward him. He senses that he is being raised off the ground and taken to safety, but the flame reaches the location where he was only a second before, exploding on impact, and the blast that results pushes him back and out of the wind's grasp. He swiftly latches onto the ground and the trunk of the tree next to him with his clawed hands before vanishing behind one of the bushes along the clearing's far edges, immediately tensing up and freezing in place. He pushes himself up and looks toward the center of the clearing, watching his favorite student change and evolve as the winds begin to die down and the red chakra of the Kyuubi retreats into his body. Naruto. Iruka jumped away before the explosive exploded, but he missed it. He was sent flying behind those bushes, but he didn't realize how quickly he recovered. He failed to notice Iruka's well-being. He only witnessed Iruka being flung out of his line of sight. He only saw Iruka being blasted away, as he had seen it, and that was all it took to get him out of his daze. He tries to call on the red lights behind him by reaching over his shoulder and pointing with his fingers. He shakes off the fatigue and drowsiness. He was furious and knew that the person who had injured one of his loved ones would be able to get even with him thanks to those red glowing tails. The tails weren't approaching him quickly enough, so he took a step back to turn around, but he stopped when he heard the growling from earlier. They've gone back to those yellow eyes when he turns to face them. He turns back to face the eyes, observing that they now appear sharper, as though they are glaring at him. As he leaned in its direction, he could just make out what appeared to be fangs and teeth. Bared in a snarl, the eyes dart in his direction without warning. The rest of his features are illuminated by the red glow, and his eyes enlarge. A huge wolf head with its mouth wide open to eat him whole was on its way to him. He prepares for death by closing his eyes and thrusting his arms forward, but instead a chill goes through him. He opens his eyes to find himself crouched on his hands and knees in the clearing once more. His body would not listen to his attempts to stand. He discovers that he has changed when he examines himself. He now had paws in place of his usual hands and feet, and black fur covered his entire body. He licked the inside of his mouth, observing how his tongue moved over his teeth, making them feel pointed and sharp. His ears twitch in response to a sound, and he turns to face the source. He smiles to himself when he sees a startled and obviously frightened Mizuki, the greenish flames around his hands extinguishing. "Wah, what are you?" he mentally yelled. "I'm the thing that's going to kill you." But, to his astonishment, only a few growls and snarls came out of his mouth. When Mizuki rekindles his flames and hurls one of his explosive flames at Naruto, it appears that he understood the message. His body refused to listen to his attempts to dodge, instead preparing for impact and confronting the explosion head-on. Shaking off the damage, he jumps to a running start and tries to use his claws to grab onto the tree. As he slides back down, he leaves long lines on the bark just as another explosion shatters wood from the spot where he was a second ago. He jumps off in time, trying to keep the big wolf in his line of sight. He then begins to circle the tree, glaring up and stalking Mizuki. While he watches the man circle in place, the wolf quickly leaves the clearing behind as it dashes toward the forest at full speed after avoiding another flame that explodes. During this brief interaction, he realized that his body was beyond his control. He was aware of every movement his body made, but he had no control over what it would do. He seems to be trapped inside his head, unable to do anything but watch, as though something has taken over his entire body. Thus, he watched, finding some solace in the thought that the person occupying his body shared his anger and was channeling it toward the jerk who had deceived him and wounded one of his most valued citizens. He watches as Mizuki continues to hurl flame after flame into the forest's darkness. He gets up to observe a wolf flying over the branch while he heals as best he can without using up all of his Yuki. The wolf drops one of his flames as he clears the branch over the location where Mizuki was just before he leapt to the side. When the flame strikes wood, it explodes, sending the two of them hurtling through the air. While the wolf is sent skidding through the dirt, Mizuki struck the tree's trunk so forcefully that it made a crater. The wolf Naruto, he tells himself, arises before Mizuki, but it appears to still be reeling from the impact based on the way its body trembles. Mizuki observes with a mixture of awe and horror as Naruto appears to recover from his injuries. Mizuki broke his transformation that day when he turned tail and fled in a panic, making yet another of his foolish mistakes. Naruto sniffs the air just a moment after vanishing, then vanishes in a flash of speed in Mizuki's direction. With his arms already changed into their clawed form, he takes to the trees to stretch the stiffness from his injured body and pursues the two, keeping a safe distance from them both. He picks up a few leaves and branches along the way, occasionally snatching wood from tree trunks or lowering himself to the ground to collect dirt and rock. He creates one of his trademark throwing knives by melting them all together with his Yuki. He sends one knife toward each of them, closing the gap between them as he channels some of his chakra through them. He starts one of his intricate techniques by performing the hand seals, which causes the knives to break in a dazzling light right in front of the eyes of his intended targets. Imp demonic art. Mischief misdirection technique. When both of his targets pause for a moment, shivering in place, before they resume their journey, Mizuki continuing on his way and Naruto darting to the left, he smiles with satisfaction, seeing the indication that his illusion has been successful. Good, I better make this quick. I don't know how long it'll hold Naruto while he's like that. He quickly catches up to Mizuki as he moves toward him at full speed. The other man turns around, his hands once more engulfed in his flames, and he throws them one after the other in his direction. As he senses his approach, he leaps forward to keep up with Mizuki, flinging the little knife at the approaching flame projectile after ducking down to avoid the first and grabbing a piece of wood from the branch he was standing on and molding it with his Yuki. A second before he gets through, the tiny knife sets off the flame when the two projectiles collide. As the second of his flames explodes, Mizuki, who has been observing his pursuer, stumbles a little on the next branch out of sheer terror, but his pursuer emerges from the smoke entirely unscathed. His pursuer was able to fully catch up to him after that minor slip out of sheer terror. He turns around and covers his face with his arms, closing his eyes in the process. He didn't realize the illusion around him was breaking in his haste to protect himself, and it shimmered into Iruka before the wolf tackled him. In front of him, the Mizuki he was pursuing shimmered out of existence as the explosion happened. His front paws claw at the ground as his tail lashes out around him in frustration, and he snaps his jaws and barks at the air. He ran away. Damn it. He could picture Naruto snarling in his own annoyance. His jaws were clenched tightly, and his hands were balled into fists. He didn't realize that he was on his hands and knees, so he yelled in frustration. Both his head and the wolf's bolt up simultaneously, their frustrations replaced by anticipation as they catch a scent in the wind. His snarl transforms into a raptor-like smile as he sniffs the air again. We have his scent, let's get him. With its mouth watering from the anticipation of finishing its hunt, the wolf moves in the direction of the scent without further prodding. When it detects a sound and realizes it is approaching, his ears twitch. It slows to a jog and stops as soon as two figures come into view, choosing to leave the two to battle it out. It follows them around in a circle in the shadows of the big, tall trees, watching, waiting, and listening. He tries to reason with his friend while pinning Mizuki against a tree with his arms and body. Mizuki, what the hell are you doing? Isn't it obvious? He holds his throat, coughing, and pushes the scar-faced nin away from him with a powerful knee to the gut. I'm trying to have the village acknowledge me. As they continued their conversation, the wolf that was pursuing them, unbeknownst to them, stopped dead in its tracks. Acknowledge you? Acknowledge you? How the hell are you going to achieve that with whatever this scheme of yours is? And why involve Naruto? Iruka regains control of his breathing and lunges for Mizuki, but is unsuccessful. When the other nin rolls aside, he snorts, draws a kunai, and holds it in front of him underhand. You don't get it, do you? The village hates the boy, but like all the rest of the world, they fear his power. If I could get him to release it on the village, if I can get him on my side, then no one will dare look at him with those hate-filled eyes, and at the same time, no one will ever dare look down on me again. As they circle one another, he draws his own kunai and assumes Mizuki's stance. That doesn't make any sense. You don't even know how much burden that boy is carrying, and you want him to release it? It'll wipe out the entire village. See, even someone as strong as you fears him? He takes out shurikens and kunais with his other hand and throws them at Iruka before lunging at him and making a diagonal cut with his kunai. With the exception of the one he caught with his other hand, Iruka blocked every shuriken and kunai. Then, he brought both kunais down to block the incoming blow, crossing them to form an X to stop Mizuki's kunai completely. He was completely exposed due to the blocked full-force strike, which caused him to lose his balance. Iruka took advantage of this by giving him a sideways kick to the ribs, which sent him rolling to the ground. It's true that I'm scared of what will happen if Naruto lets out all the power he's keeping in Cheka. When Naruto hears those words, he recoils in pain and starts to flee, but he stops when he hears the rest of Iruka's words. But I don't fear him. I respect him. He may have been burdened with so much power, but he's never once thought of letting it all out in anger, for fear of hurting everyone around him. He knows how dangerous his powers are, and he's such a kind person that he would never dream of using it to hurt other people like everyone. I fear his power, but unlike most of the village's stupidity, I don't hate him. I respect him. I respect him. His mind struggled to make sense of what was happening, and those words kept coming back to him. He simply lay there, floating around in the dark, his mouth and eyes wide, frozen in shock. Because of those words, he has lost all of his anger, and he was beginning to feel guilty when he realized that by using his newfound power to tear that Mizuki bastard to pieces, he had nearly betrayed his teacher's faith in him. With a faint smile and tears already starting to well up in the corners of his eyes, he sat up and shook his head. However, when he hears a growl and feels it, he looks up in surprise. Iruka and Mizuki were caught off guard as the wolf tensed and coiled into a crouch before launching itself into a pounce like a spring with its teeth only an inch from drawing blood. It stopped just as it was clamping down, its jaws wide open as it attempted to tear the scar-faced nin's head off completely. The wolf turns abruptly again and begins to shake its head, as though to get its mind straight. Even though he was in shock, the scarred nin managed to speak, and he was surprised by how composed his voice was. Naruto? The wolf stiffened, then spun around to meet the man's eyes. Iruka lets out the breath he didn't realize he was holding in when he sees his eyes. Those black slits among those familiar clear blue eyes. When those eyes begin flashing alternately between the feral yellow and the kind blue, his attempt to smile at his student fails. Looks like he isn't in control yet, and we're not yet out of danger. Come on Naruto, I know you can do it. When the wolf's eyes turn yellow, its fangs bare into a snarl, its ears are pulled flat against its head, and a tiny growl emerges from its throat, he slowly raises his hand and begins to reach for its nose. He steels himself and lets out a trembling breath before reaching for his pupil again. The wolf doesn't move, but it continues to growl and snarl. He holds his breath in anticipation as he finally places his hand on the wolf's nose. He turned back to the wolf's eyes. When nothing happened, he slides his arm up along the snout as he notices that the eyes are beginning to focus on the blue with only a few yellow flashes at last. As the wolf advances and its eyes turn blue, he puts his arms around its neck, reaches up, and begins to scratch just behind its ears up until Mizuki made his presence known with a sudden outburst of his Yuki and chakra. They both forgot he was there as they relaxed. So that's what you've been planning, huh? Both of them turned to face Mizuki, who has already changed into his hobgoblin Yukai form. His chin, nose, and ears all grew longer and sharper, and his skin turned a sickly yellow color. Covered in dark green tattoo lines, his lips pull back in a snarl to reveal his sharp, pointed teeth, and his eyes, which are glowing with the same green flames that wrapped around his clawed hands, turn into tiny black beads encircled by yellow sclera. All this time you were planning on making him obey you. All this time, you were acting to get at his power. Frustrated, he threw caution and fear aside and jumped at the two, shouting as he went. He forces Naruto and Iruka to part ways by igniting a flame between them. He immediately focuses on Iruka and launches his attack, with Iruka barely avoiding the explosives. His fist pierces the other side as he clings to his old friend's vest. Iruka's faint grimace indicates that it wasn't particularly powerful, but Mizuki didn't seem to mind. Iruka was blown away by the explosion from Mizuki's fist, but not before his manic grin returned and the evil glint in his eyes flashed. He discards the torn portion of Iruka's vest he was carrying and approaches Iruka, who is hunched over the tree he was flung against, slowly. His hands, still encased in the flames of Yuki, begin to form seals as he begins to channel his chakra. The fire surrounding Tiger's hands intensifies as he settles on him. The flames dancing around his hands move toward the center, swirling as though they were being drawn in by a vortex, and gradually forming a large fireball of green flame as he slowly inches his hands apart. As soon as it was finished, he squeezed it like a balloon by holding it firmly in a clawed hand. He yells the ball's name while observing the whirling flames surrounding it. Hobgoblin Demonic Art, Hob Bomb Technique, a deluxe version. The flames begin to dance more wildly than before. With a burst of Yuki, he gazes up at his old friend's still slumped figure. He withdraws the fireball-wielding hand. Time for you to die, old friend, he throws his technique after finishing his piece. As the fireball flies in the direction of the other Chunin, he observes with grim satisfaction. But before it can make contact, the flaming ball is blown out by the Yuki and the strong winds created by the unexpected Yuki explosion behind him, and it vanishes in puffs of smoke. When the dark Yuki he had previously experienced abruptly returned, his eyes widened in shock and terror. He hears a big footstep toward him, and then another, and his breath catches when a shadow suddenly hangs over him. He begins to hyperventilate in terror. He swallows hard and slowly turns to face the tall figure behind him, his teeth chattering and his entire body trembling. His knees began to weaken from the sight in front of him, but he forced himself to stay upright and fight the urge to faint. The big wolf had vanished, or at least changed form. It was standing on its hind legs instead of on its hands and knees like a typical wolf. It retained the dark fur, tail, and hind legs of the wolf from the waist down. It was more man-wolf from the waist up. From his waist to the front of its neck, the only exposed schiena, which was dark gray in color, was visible. Its clawed human-like hand was covered in fur, which extended all over its muscular arms and shoulders, snaked around the collarbone, and climbed up the side of its neck, reaching the area beneath its armpits and the side of its chest before retreating to its back and covering the upper portion of its back before gradually thinning out to form a funnel-like shape and falling up to the spot parallel to its belly button. Its hunched back displayed the massive muscles surrounding its neck. The wolf's head was on its neck, its brows wrinkled, its ears pressed at the top of its head, its yellow eyes with black slits narrowed in anger and hatred, its fangs bared and its lips pulled back in a menacing snarl. The hobgoblin was startled into action by its loud roar, which was produced by its muscles tensing, fingers curling and uncurling, and tail lashing out behind it. Mizuki attempted to turn around and flee, but his speed was insufficient. Mizuki was knocked out instantly when the big werewolf swung its powerful arm in a blur of motion, backhanding his side and sending him flying into a tree. His Yukai form shatters after he loses consciousness. The werewolf looks up at the sky after witnessing the transformation lost, and when it sees the full moon's bright light, it lets out a triumphant roar that ends in a loud howl. His abrupt movement causes his chair to topple over and fall clatteringly to the floor. He gets up and stoops, ignoring his perspiration-soaked clothing as he struggles to control his breathing while one hand grips his chest and the other the edge of the table. With his jaw clenched and his heart seized by more agony and despair, he tilts his head sideways to gaze at his crystal ball's representation of the howling werewolf beneath the full moon. His hand gripping the edge of the table snaps the wood, removing a chunk from the table, and the hand clutching his chest vanishes in a blur of movement as he swings it in a sweeping motion, knocking everything on top of the table down and onto the ground. The bracelet that was stifling his power was vibrating wildly because he was so consumed by his rage. This was not supposed to happen yet. It's too early, it's too dangerous. Whether it was anger or the pain and sadness, he didn't know. Tears began to fall down his cheeks and his entire body began to tremble. He reaches for his crystal ball slowly, holds it firmly in both hands, and draws it near to his chest. Naruto. As tears fall on the top of the crystal ball, he drops to his knees. He closely monitors the child, whom he views as a member of his family. I know you can do it. I'm so proud of you. You completed the first phase of the trial. His eyes shift from the crystal ball to a glare when there's a knock on the door. I'm busy. For a few seconds there is a slight shuffling of papers and feet, and then there is silence for a few more seconds. He continues to glare at the door before returning his attention to the crystal ball. He didn't intend to yell, but he was currently so overcome by feelings that he was unable to control them all. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, Naruto. There was supposed to be time before Thesa, but it cannot be undone so soon. After you've overcome the first phase of the trial, you were forced to face the second, but I know that you're strong enough to beat it. I believe in you, Naruto. He keeps watching while his hands tighten around the crystal ball. His emotions were not eased by the knowledge that Naruto could overcome his difficulties. He continued to feel hurt and depressed because a child so young and burdened is made to endure so many hardships. He was still angry at the man who had inadvertently pushed the start of the second phase. He experienced the grief, the pain, and the rage, but he knew Naruto could overcome this trial. All he could do was watch. Something wasn't right. It was similar to his wolf days, but distinct. He flexes his fingers and examines his hands. He was in charge. Even though he had total control over his body, he still found it challenging to move in the manner he desired. It seemed as though his instincts were forcing him to move without conscious thought. He was hesitant to slap the terrified man, just as he had been with Mizuki, not quite sending him crashing into a tree. Anyway, his arm moved out of some sort of reflex, but he was happy with a simple shove because he knew he was stronger than before, and as of right now all he wanted to do was approach Iruka to see how he was doing. But here he was, pushing the man up the tree while holding him by the neck. Naruto. He attempted a smile, but it was frightening because of the intimidating image he saw reflected in Iruka's eyes. It was unsettling to consider that he was afraid of himself. Iruka-sensei. He felt his mouth opening wide as he attempted to form the words on his lips. Oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no. For an instant, he believed that his attempt to remove his fingers from the man's throat had been successful. His thumb moved and his fingers relaxed. But when his thumb landed on Iruka's cheek and pushed on the side of his face to turn his head to the side, his moment of relief quickly turned to fear. Once more the man's neck was fully visible as his index and middle fingers moved from the back of his neck to the back of his head, pressing on and angling it. In an attempt to pull the other hand away from Iruka, it instead grabbed the man's shoulder, causing both hands to slightly separate, exposing more of Iruka's neck. Noah, stop. No. His open mouth was still slowly creeping toward Iruka's neck, but he continued to fight himself. He retaliated, and after a brief pause, his body moved forward again. His mouth trembled a little when he tried to close it. No. His teeth snapped shut as his body jolted forward, landing on the tree behind him, just inches above his bare neck. Then he could clearly hear it. His mind's tiny suggestions, which he believed to be instincts, spoke in a voice that was both familiar and unfamiliar to him. He is your brother, isn't he? He's my favorite sensei. Fool. You see him as your brother, do you not? He became aware that the growling and snarling he heard originated in both his mind and his mouth. With a blink, he was back in his thoughts, and this time, flashbacks to his time spent with Iruka appeared. He had believed for a long time that prior to doing what he had to do to defend the village, Itachi was the only brother he had ever had. However, after seeing all these memories of times he treasured, he realized he was mistaken. He simply never realized that he had never acknowledged it aloud, even though he had known it all along. Yeah, I guess I really do see him as my older brother, and that's why you shouldn't hurt him. His entire world trembled as the growl came, and the memories vanished in a puff of smoke. You fool. You are merely bonded as brothers. Then, with a thin line of white light defining it, he saw the outline of a huge wolf head. But with my help, You can truly be brothers with my help. You can turn him into true Brifrina." Naruto lost his temper when he understood what the curse was attempting to accomplish. His rage erupted. "You're making me spread your curse. You want me to bring pain to Othersa, to Iruka-sensei, and to the village." His anger was accompanied by a new strength that he had forgotten for some reason, but this time it was the same strength taking control of his body. He let go of Iruka and jumped back, spitting wood splinters and chunks out of his mouth. Suddenly, his familiar strength vanished and he was struggling to regain control of his body as the wolf head in his head roared, and so did his own. "Turn him into one of us. You will not be disappointed. You two will truly be brethren then. I won't let you hurt anyone. You can't make me hurt anyone." They were yelling at each other in his mind, but his body was obviously fighting itself in the real world. Twitching as it struggled with unwanted impulses, his physical body froze as a breeze ruffled his fur, reflecting the abrupt stop of the wolf head image in his mental body. This Senta. Together, the two spoke, but they weren't listening to each other. It's familiara. He was so focused on trying to smell it again that he failed to notice the wolf head becoming silent and motionless, or the fact that he was once again in total control of his body. He rose to his full height, nose up in the air, and sniffed at the scent. Trying to reach it again, he inhaled deeply and exhaled through his mouth after catching the scent once more. Lavendera. Additionally, he could almost taste vanilla on his tongue. In an instant, his body began to move, but not toward the scent. It was fleeing from his body. His attempt to regain control was a gradual one, as he struggled to catch up to the one that took over after being caught off guard and stunned earlier. In addition to his body slowing down, the scent was gradually fading. He would completely lose it and be unable to control his body in a matter of more steps as he struggled desperately to maintain control. He was beginning to panic when a melodic voice came with another breeze to him. It was like music. "Wait for me, my dear Naruto." Even though it was only a whisper in the wind, it had a profound impact on him. His body was now entirely under his control, and the wolf head in his head shrank. He didn't really care how he was able to follow the voice. He just followed the wind without thinking. All he knew was that he had to hold on to it like it was his last line of defense because he couldn't let it go. But as soon as he was able to locate the scent, he doubled his efforts and moved so quickly that he appeared to have teleported, covering the distance between him and the scent source in a single step. He stood at the edge of the clearing and inhaled deeply, enjoying the flavor and aroma of the air. He emerged from the forest's shadow and surveyed the clearing, finding it difficult to believe what he was seeing. There was a small lake in the center of the rather large clearing that reflected the moon. There were a few berry bushes along the edges of the clearing and around the edges of each small, thin tree, which seemed to be barricades keeping the larger trees out. The sounds of owls and birds chirping, the squeaks and ruffling of leaves as small animals scuttled about, and the trickling water from the small waterfall created by the rock formations above the lake filled the clearing. It was soothing because the clearing was so vibrant in contrast to the surrounding dark and seemingly lifeless woods. He felt comfortable here. Somehow he was even at peace with his inner wolf. He took a deep breath of the air, which smelled so clean and fresh, with faint notes of lavender that also gave the air a vanilla flavor. Every taste and breath made him feel refreshed. His attention was drawn to the water by sounds of bubbling, which was now generating steam that resembled mist and was fogging the air and rolling across the ground, causing the light to break into moonbeam streaks. He approached the lake's edge and knelt down to try to see what was causing the bubbling, but he was unable to see anything. Before he touched the water, he glanced around. He blinked as he looked back into the water, and a figure appeared beneath the surface, staring up at him. She appeared to be glowing from within the shadows of the water because of how pale and white her skin was. He got to his feet and stepped back, and the submerged figure slowly came to the surface and approached him, like she was climbing a set of stairs. She was soon in full view, hip cocked to the side, one thin hand on it, the other supporting her long, damp hair away from her eyes. She was flaunting her curvy figure in what appeared to be a nightgown that was a bit too tight and ended just below her butt cheeks. On top of it, it appeared to be a robe, but it was left open because it was too small and short enough to appear like a basic jacket, falling just above her shoulders. She flashed her long, sharp canines and smiled confidently. So sure and certain of herself, she looked up and down at him with her lilac eyes. She might have been carved of marble because of her smooth, pale skin, but her thin body and face gave the impression that she was a mannequin made of porcelain, which is far more delicate than marble. Before going through her long hair, the hand holding it up shook a few drops off. It swayed perfectly to her every move and looked so soft and smooth. Coming from underwater, he saw that she wasn't as soaked as she should have been. After glancing at her feet, he followed his gaze up her slim legs and up her attractive hips. observing her small waist and toned stomach before focusing on her face. The sight was breathtaking. In addition to being extremely attractive, she was undoubtedly cute. However, it didn't end there. She was also stunningly beautiful and charmingly charming. Even the term, ridiculously attractive, didn't seem to do her justice, and he couldn't decide what else to call her. He was startled out of his reverie by her singing voice as she spoke. "Your bath is ready, my dear." The fact that her plan was working pleased her. She could still sense the tension in the big man wolf, even though he was now unwinding in the warm bath she had prepared for him. She was unsure of how she knew that whatever was going on was related to the agitation she could almost feel from the man and the wolf that only took one form. She only knew that she could somehow feel and comprehend his emotions after she had called forth her transformation. She also knew what would help both the beast and the man relax. That's why she had prepared everything. Rewind. The surface of the tiny lake erupted in bubbles, and then a brief whirlpool formed, which quickly transformed into a geyser that sprayed water up to 2 feet high. However, none of the water that was blasted upward fell because the majority of it formed a dome and the remainder turned into a fine mist. The ball of water rotated a few times before breaking outward to reveal the Hyuga heiress within. She took a step toward the ground and looked around. Her body shivered as soon as her feet touched. "He's starting to run wild." Her eyes focus on the tiny breeze that was circling the tiny clearing. Suppressing the chills, the wind swirled together in a ball on top of her open palm as she extended her hand. "Hello there, what could I do for you?" She listened intently as the wind spoke to her, howling and swirling as though they were releasing as little of their voice as possible. The wind sighed and the message they were carrying came out in a low whisper. "Wait for Maya." She gave a mildly amused smile and turned to her messenger. "I see, that's mighty kind of you, but I wonder if you could hold on to that for me for just a little bit longer. I'll tell you when the time is right for you to send it out." Before eventually blowing through her fingers and continuing to patrol the clearing's edges, the wind whirled into a tiny tornado and raced around her hand. She turned around and blew a kiss into the wind. She looked around at the dimly lit area, observing that the silence of the night made it seem as though nature herself was holding her breath. She glanced over her shoulder and stared at the shadowy trees behind her as she felt another chill go up her spine. She was aware of Naruto's presence, but she wasn't ready to approach him just yet. As he was now, there was nothing she could do to help him. She traces the side of her eyes as she considers using her Byakugan to watch over him while she works, but ultimately decides against it in order to avoid becoming sidetracked. She looks around the clearing once more. It needs a lot more life in it. She dips her hand into the water while kneeling, pulls it up, and a tiny drop of moisture lands on her fingers. She whispers to the element, holding it to her lips. "I need a little favor." She kissed the bead tenderly and slid it away, causing the water to break into tiny sparkles. She saw the lake's water overflow and spread out over the ground, covering the whole clearing. The water soon reached the edges and began to seep into the dirt, releasing the clean scent of a cool rain. She smiled broadly, exposing all of her teeth. Water was her natural affinity, and she had always loved how it could both bring life and heal. She inhaled deeply, relishing the aroma of moist soil. She sensed that life was beneath it, just waiting to explode. A little light was all it needed as the moon rose higher in the night sky, its light spilling over the top of the tall trees to bathe the clearing in shining moonbeams. She seemed to oblige her thoughts with a little giggle. Suddenly, life appeared in the dreary clearing. Tiny shrubs grew beneath the small, slender trees that sprang up out of the ground, all of them bearing berries and fruits. Bushes grew and flowers bloomed in and around them, creating a barrier around the clearing. Before long, owls were hooting, butterflies were fluttering, and strangely enough, birds were chirping. These were followed by the scuttering sounds of small animals that had been drawn to the lively area. Her eyes were closed and her hands were outstretched as she whirled in place, laughing melodiously. She cherished this sensation, the sensation of being encircled by so much life and in the middle of nature. However, a roar cut her off from her happiness, causing her laughter to die on her throat. A howl sounded from the darkness of the deep forest as she halted her spinning and turned to face it. She raises her hand again, beckoning to the wind that would be calling for him as her brow furrows in concern. "I'm sorry, but it's time." As it sped off and vanished into the forest, the wind whirled around her hand, grazing her fingers. She exhales a trembling breath and looks back at the water. She drops to her knees, cups her hands, dips them into the water, lifts them up, and splashes her face. She felt better immediately. As her mind worked, she dipped her hand in the water again and moved it around. The water always felt just right against her skin. Even though she knew it should be freezing cold, she jumped right in and got to work, knowing that things wouldn't be the same for him. Time to get his bath ready. Finish the flashback. She is startled to discover that she had somehow gotten close to him and was caressing his head and scratching behind his ears. After a little growl jolts her out of her reverie. It took her a second to realize that he was pressing his face and muzzle to her neck, and due to his size, to her chest as well. She was surprised when she blinked a few times and blushed all over her face and up her neck, because whenever she calls upon her True Hyuga blood, her confidence and self-worth soar, making her the total opposite of her usual timid and shy self. She backed off from the werewolf's approach, shaking her head. A tiny whine escaped from his throat as she looked closely at him and giggled at the wolf head's beseeching eyes. His eyes closed again in pleasure as she reached up and scratched at his ears. She smiled for a moment, but as soon as she realized the agitation was still present, it quickly changed to a frown. The boy was obviously already in control, but she could sense that the wild animal was still fighting, refusing to cry. She puts her other arm around his neck and draws him in close, burying her face in the fur on top of his head. Then, in an attempt to calm him, she begins to whisper. "Sheesh, it'll be alright, nothing to worry about, you're safe here with Maya." She could feel him becoming more relaxed, so she kept whispering and positioned herself to nestle up against his neck, her arm still hugging him and her other hand still scratching behind his ears. When she senses that the untamed animal is finally calming down, she begins to smile, which blossoms into a broad smile as his arms encircle her waist in an embrace. Then she realized they had captured the untamed animal. "Sheesh, it's over, it's almost over, you're alright, you're okay." Or so she believed. A painful explosion of heat from his chest causes his eyes to snap open. As if liquid fire were flowing through his veins, he could feel it slowly spreading throughout his body. His muscles tighten and tense before abruptly protruding. He can feel his skin getting longer and longer until it feels like it might tear. Fur begins to grow, and his bare skin itches. He quickly claws the dirt to pull himself away from the water and pushes her away as gently as he can. Even as his arms and legs twitch violently and his body convulses, he crawls away. "Naruto-kun?" He forces himself to lie down and holds out one hand to tell her to stop, but she misinterprets and grabs for it. He drags his butt along the dirt as his legs push him farther away. He tries to speak, but all he manages to do is cough and hack. "Stay away, get back. Something's wrong, something." He keeps backing away from her, but she wouldn't allow it, so he shakes his head with that anxious look on her face. She keeps reaching for him. He tries to tell her to back off once more, but it's becoming more difficult to concentrate. He felt as though something was pulling him up from above, telling him to look up. Despite his strong desire to comply, he knew that doing so would put him and her in danger. "Hey Aka." His eyes widen and he lets out a growl. His body begins to stiffen, and his lower jaw begins to shake. When the wolf growled in his mind, he was still staring at her. "Mate. No." He forces himself to look up, pries his eyes from her, but as soon as his head jerks up, he realizes that he simply made a mistake. He begins to feel dizzy as the pale light of the full moon high overhead reflects in his eyes. His hand slips, he loses his balance, and his vision becomes blurry. He felt as though he was losing himself as he lay there and gazed at the moon in the sky. It was just like Bephoria, only the wolf's growls and snarls, as well as the snapping sounds it makes when it bites at the air, broke his train of thought. When he turned to face it, he noticed that it was much more agitated than before. What's his problem? He's already winning, isn't he? The heat returns, exploding hotter from his chest and spreading more quickly throughout his body as if to respond to his query. He tries to sit up, but the twitching causes his arms to collapse. Before long, he was thrashing around and scratching at his chest and the ground. He pushes himself to his feet and slams his body against a tree because he can no longer stand it. He slams his fists to the floor as the tree snaps like a twig. He scratches at his chest and then at his arms as the fire flares up once more, with legs kicking dirt everywhere and teeth snapping at the air. He violently jerks his head from left to right and then back. He turns abruptly when he hears a shuffling behind him, his mouth opening in a roar of rage, but he is stopped when he feels something touch his neck. He heard some mumbling and felt it tremble, but his ragged breathing made it difficult to hear. His breathing became calmer and slower as he tried to hear what the thing on his neck was saying, and eventually he was able to make out what it was. "It's alright, it's okay, I'm here for you, I'm just right here." He could feel himself being calmed as she repeatedly said the same words with his thumb lightly stroking her back. He raises his hand to rest on her. He places his hand as she takes a step back, and her grip loosens. He holds her up to his eyes with his hand in front of him. He brings her up to his cheek. As she reaches forward, she strokes his cheek with her hands while grinning up at him. She says a few more words, and he knows they're fine. "It's okay. No one will hurt you, and I know you don't want to hurt me or anyone." He disappoints her and shuts his eyes to focus. "It's over, I won't be beaten by the likes of you. I'm going to be Hokage. I'm going to live to protect, not to just hurt anybody." He was back to his typical werewolf height when he opened his eyes. The woman in front of her could only reach up to his chest, but he still loomed over her. She smiles up at him as he looks down on her, feeling a familiar tug. He closes his mind and is abruptly drawn into his mindscape. He opens his eyes and sees a familiar pair of red eyes behind a number of steel bars. He gives his tenant a smile. "Hey, about time." As the Kyuubi hears footsteps on the chilly floor behind him, he looks up before he speaks again. The Kyuubi looks back at him, lies down on the ground, and tries his best to level his eyes with his jailer. Looks like we'll be having company from now on. When he turns around to see what the fox was talking about, he is met with yellow eyes that are as big and bright in the dark as the Kyuubi's, and they are positioned as high as they usually are. Footsteps indicate that the owner of those eyes is approaching, and as it does, the eyes become smaller and lower until they are level with his gaze. Then, the figure emerges from the shadows to show a huge wolf that was just as tall as him. He looks directly into its eyes and observes how they have managed to contain their animalistic rage. He reaches up, puts a hand on its head, and then ruffles its fur without showing any signs of fear. "Hey, we're all friends in here, okay?" With yellow eyes watching him intently, he smiles broadly at the wolf. The wolf gives what appears to be a snort, turns around, and retreats back into the shadows, looking into the Kyuubi's eyes from behind the blonde before his tail touches the boy's still outstretched hand, though it moves up. "That's going to take a lot more time, kid. After all, you're covered in fox stench. Just pray that by the time you get covered in his scent as well, I would already be used to it." The Kyuubi turned around and began pushing the boy out after he finished speaking. As he was being forced from his own thoughts, he was only able to think of one thing. This is going to take some time. He returned to his physical form. When he blinked his eyes, the first thing he saw was that he was staring up at a large chest instead of down at a lovely face. His eyes widened in realization. After he blinked a few more times, however, the woman in front of him abruptly fell to her knees and embraced him before he could turn away. Oh, Naruto! Even with her eyes closed, she was able to see it. He pushed her away, and she could still see the fur growing on his bare skin as he clawed his way out of the water. She could still see the tremors in his body as Yuki rolled off him in waves. Occasionally pulsing red chakra around him, she could still make out patterns and lines of reddish fur. Above all, she could still see how he began to grow larger and larger until, when he stood up, he was as tall as the big trees that surrounded them. He had not been the source of her fear. He was injuring himself, which scared her. After breaking the embrace, she withdrew from the boy in front of him and gave him a close examination. She didn't really care that he was still in his werewolf form and had black fur, even though he had shrunk to his normal size. His eyes, the vivid blue ones she adored so much, were blue when she looked into them. As his Yuki began to fade and his form reverted to that of the typical Naruto, she grinned. "See? I told you we're okay and I'm still here?" Now in his human form, Naruto grinned broadly at her. "Yeah, thanks a lot, lady." She released her transformation and changed back to her normal form. Knowing that Naruto was safe, she swayed back and forth shortly after, her vision beginning to blur. It took her some time to get used to using her invoked form, and she didn't have many opportunities to practice it. The image of the giant werewolf flashed with one last thought before she passed out, and the last thing she saw before going black was Naruto's face. "It's going to take some time before I get used to that image." She closed her eyes and landed squarely on top of him. Fortunately, Naruto had enough time to get ready and catch her. Because she had swayed slightly before fainting, he couldn't help but let out a gasp of surprise when he observed her sleeping face. The cutest person he had ever met was standing in front of him, taking the place of the most beautiful person he had ever seen. "No way, Hinata." As soon as he recovered, his mind went into overdrive, and he blinked a few times to get over his shock. "No way. What the heck was that?" He struggled to piece together all the details she knew about her. Okay, Hyuga Vanity Homunculus, Vampire Nymph Homunculus are said to have a transformation of some sorts, but the Hyugas never showed any signs of something like that. He made an effort to sift through some of his memories in order to remember more details and information that he had previously collected. Hyuga Byakugan. Yeah, the activation of the Byakugan could be considered their transformation, same as with the Sharingan of the Uchiha's. Wait, did she use her Byakugan? No, I don't think she used it. Can she even use it while in that form? As he thought, he gazed at the Hyuga in his arms. The Hyugas and the Uchihas don't really need to invoke their vampire Yuki because it's mainly responsible for healing. Also, that Yuki automatically activates when they get in battle, augmenting their overall abilities. They both invoke their homunculus Yuki when they activate their eyes, which also fully releases all of their vampire Yuki, and basically that's all the transformations they undergo. So what makes Hinata so special? It seemed as though everything came together when a memory flashed through his mind. My mother is a nymph enigma. She's part nymph. Of course, she isn't a full vampire homunculus like the others. And because her nymph blood shows strongly, her Hyuga hybrid blood is hidden deep inside her. So when she calls on it, it invokes differently from the others. He gazes in wonder at the girl who is sleeping in her arms. Wow, Hinata-chan, you're amazing. When she wriggles in his arms, probably in search of a more comfortable position, he smiles. And really cute too. As he crosses the closest tree, he picks up her legs and carries her bridal style. In order to keep her from falling while she takes off his jacket, He moves her weight and positions her. He settles her into a comfortable and peaceful position on his lap while he sits on the ground and leans back on the tree. He believed that this was the least he could do for her after everything she had been through and the enormous risk she had taken by getting herself involved. Leaning his head back to rest himself, he placed his jacket over her elongated legs. Good thing old man had these clothes custom made in preparation for this werewolf thing. He sensed her stirring and opened his eyes. He had already blinked the drowsiness from his eyes by the time she awoke. As he greeted her, he grinned down at her. "Good morning, Hinata-chan." She looked up in disbelief, and before she could even stammer out her response, her face turned red in an instant. "Gee, good morning, Naruto-kun." He glanced up at the sky and noted the moon's position. "You've only slept for like an hour." His expression was slightly worried as he turned back to face her. "You weren't comfortable? Or did I move and wake you?" As she responded, she waved her hands in front of her and shook her head rapidly. No, I guess I just suddenly woke up." He grinned at first, but it vanished as soon as a horrified expression took its place. "Don't tell me I snore. Oh man, how loud was it?" Before she burst out laughing, she blinked several times. She returned his smile when she saw it on his face. It's not that it's actually quite comfortable, sleeping like this." He shrugged and pulled his jacket up over her toes. "Are you cold? You should sleep some more. You slept for only an hour at most?" He glanced up at the moon again as he spoke, nodded, and turned back to her. "Actually, make that an hour and 12 minutes. How do you know that, Naruto-kun?" "The position of the moon, I don't exactly know how I know, but I just kind of feel it must be a werewolf thing." He winked and smiled at her while pointing his nose at the moon. She can't stop laughing. Making light of a difficult moment in his life was very typical of Naruto. She curled up against his chest and sighed. Her face flushed and her heart pounded as she realized what she was doing, and her eyes snapped open. She was positive he could feel the pounding in her heart. She pushed away from him, letting out another sigh of disappointment. She excused herself and got up, stretching as she went, because even though she really wanted to sleep, she wasn't feeling that exhausted anymore. After taking a deep breath, she became aware that she had never felt better in her life. Unfortunately, a sudden, terrifying thought interrupted her good mood. She pivoted to confront Naruto. "I need to get home. Father will be so angry at me for being gone so long." At the mention of returning home, he noticed that her stutter had gotten worse. He shrugged it off, grabbed his jacket, and got up, dusting himself and his jacket. "Alright then, let's go and get you home safe, okay Hinata-chan?" When Naruto's body appeared to shimmer, her response died in her throat. She gave him a worried look, which grew when she noticed the expression on his face that he didn't anticipate that as well. All of a sudden, he became serious and began to look around. She slowly turned her head to see what he saw when his eyes lingered on one area, but she was unable to see it. Whatever it was, she only saw the tree that had been mowed down by Naruto's enormous werewolf form. Naruto was holding her hand in his, their fingers intertwined. When she felt something brush against her hand and looked down, he squeezed her hand and stepped in the direction he was looking. "Before that though, I need you to come with me." He simply gave her a slight smile that concealed an emotion she was unable to identify when her head snapped up to meet his face. "Don't worry, I just want to introduce you to someone." He was guiding her to the downed tree before she had even nodded. When they passed it, she looked at him curiously and waited while watching the forest's darkness. Later, there was the sound of footsteps and a burst of yellow light that was obscured by the majority of the trees. She could feel herself holding her breath as Naruto's hold tightened. Before long, she noticed a figure moving toward them. Naruto released her hand as it approached and moved forward to confront the figure. He came to a halt, spun around, and introduced himself as soon as the figure emerged from the shadows and into the dim light to reveal who he was. "Hinata-chan, I'd like you to meet my dad." Her mind was racing as it attempted to comprehend the truth of what she was witnessing. A figure that appeared to be an older Naruto stood in front of her. He lacked the facial whisker marks and had longer hair. She was feeling a little starstruck right now, and more than that, she recognized him because the fourth Hokage, Minato Namikaze, Naruto's father, was standing in front of her. She straightened her clothes and bowed in the Hyuga's proper manner after giving herself a mental slap to bring her back to reality. "It is a honor meeting you, Hokage-sama. Please, call me Minato." With a distressed expression on her face, she hurried to her feet and began shaking her head while waving her hands in front of her. No, I see, couldn't possibly, please, I insist." She made the decision that she would not defeat them after noticing the Hokage's kind grin and Naruto's broad smile. "Oh okay Thina Minato-sama." He put a gentle hand on her shoulder and suddenly burst out laughing, causing her cheeks to burn red. "Well, that's a start, Dad. You're embarrassing her." In an attempt to pull her away from Minato, Naruto had seized her by the elbow and given her a little shove, but his hold on her shoulder was firm. It was too much joy for the poor girl to handle. Hinata glanced from Naruto's hand on her elbow to the Hokage's hand on her shoulder. From the man's slightly sly smile to the boy's apologetic and irritated smirk, she also noted how close she was to the two and the family-like atmosphere she was experiencing around them, something she had never imagined having with Naruto's side since she believed him to be an orphan. She obviously passed out. She was awakened by Naruto's yelling when she opened her eyes. The two blondes were sitting on the fallen tree at the edge of the clearing, and she was leaning against a tree near the little lake. If Naruto's ecstatic yelling and crazed gestures were any indication, he appeared to be telling his father about everything that had happened in his life that the Hokage had overlooked. When she noticed the boy's happiness, she grinned since it was an uncommon occurrence. She watched them reenact Naruto's daily life while leaning on the tree with contentment. And, Gramps had these clothes custom made for me. Look, even when they get ripped apart when I turned into the large wolf or the werewolf thing, it reacted to my chakra and reformed as soon as I was normal. The boy pouted as the older blonde laughed and ruffled his head. Hinata laughed because it was such a novel scene and something she had never anticipated, seeing both of the blondes turn to face her after hearing the sound, causing her to eep and slowly lower her head to conceal her face in the jacket that was fastened around her. Hey Hinata-chan, are you feeling better now? Even though Minato was beckoning her over, she didn't move to approach them despite looking up and nodding her head playfully. Said blonde gave his son a shove. Maybe this is a good time to test out your powers? Naruto just stared down at his hands as he stretched and curled them. He nodded, looking up at his father with a determined expression in his eyes. He tried to make a hand seal with his hands, but failed. You remember the seals, don't you? Minato showed Naruto the hand seals despite his nod. He practiced the technique on himself after closely observing his father and reliving the memory. Naruto was no longer beside his father when Hinata blinked. He wasn't there. When she looked around the clearing, she turned to the Hokage for clarification, but he appeared just as perplexed as she did. But as soon as she got to her feet, a tiny sound came from above. Her eyes widened in shock as she looked up, and she leapt away from the tree where Naruto had fallen, yelling, "En Naruto-kuna!" When a firm hand landed gently on her shoulder, she jumped in surprise. Minato was already beside her when she looked up, and she was surprised that she hadn't seen Naruto untangle himself from the branches and fall to the ground. Naruto, are you okay? Yeah. Hinata thought grumpily as he muttered his response. Her curiosity overcame her desire to laugh at how adorable he was. What happened? Well, since the wolf's curse has been released and the seal along with it, Naruto can now use his true power. Minato was beaming with pride when she looked up at him, but his smile wavered when he realized his son wasn't as excited about it as he was concerned. She turned to face Naruto, but the Hokage asked the question before her. Son, what's wrong? He simply lay down spread-eagled and gave Hinata a weary smile. She kept a close eye on him while he simply gazed up at the night sky, but she shifted sideways when he suddenly pulled at her. She was fortunate that Minato was there to save her, but as she raised her head to give him thanks, she noticed that his whole body was glimmering, as though it were vanishing and resurfacing. She wanted to question him about it, but he gave her a beseeching look that made her keep quiet. He turned to face the boy on the floor, and she followed suit. What's wrong with using his true power that would make him so bothered? She gradually tried to determine the cause of his dismay by mentally reviewing everything she knew about the blonde. She remembered how the villagers would treat him, how they would whisper behind his back and glare at him. She also recalled the moment when a rock struck him in the head, and everyone in the vicinity froze in horror. Upon realizing what had happened, she had assumed that the fear stemmed from the ninja's potential to arrest them, but after giving it some more thought, she saw that they had all calmed down when Naruto brushed himself off and that he was fine, grinning his fake smile. She approached the boy on the ground and sat down directly beside him, reflecting on everything she knew about him, the way that, despite the fact that he didn't actually do anything to cause it, people seemed to both fear and despise him. He would constantly pull at his glove while anxiously scanning his surroundings as though they held a terrible secret. En Naruto-kun? Is that the R reason the versus village people treat you the wa? Your true power, I am mean? The boy sighed with exhaustion, but his father covered his face with his hands and groaned in frustration. They're still on about that. Don't worry about it, Dad, it's really not that bad. Naruto sat up and made an effort to sound and look as happy as he could, but it was hardly successful. With a sigh, the Hokage sat down in front of him, pouting and crossing his arms over his chest. I already explained to them as best as I could that the Kyuubi Issa. The Kyuubi? I thought they hated HMB because of the sea curse and F feared him B because of the Kyuubi? She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she failed to notice Minato staring at her with wide eyes as Naruto buried his face in his hands. "Did you Saya hate?" She blinked at him incomprehensibly and shook her head to get her thoughts straight. He was no longer the easygoing man who exuded strength and authority in addition to the thick chakra with traces of Yuki surrounding him, which warped the very air. His anger was evident on his face and in the way his body behaved. Dad, it's okay, it's not that bada really." Still visibly enraged, he glanced at her and then at his son before closing his eyes and beginning to take deep, soothing breaths. He opened his eyes, which were now icy blue instead of the serene blue of the sky. Once he was certain he was in control. "Come on Dad, it's okay really, they just don't understand, I guess. And because they don't understand, they fear you, and because you don't do anything to solidify that fear, they turn it into hate. Is that their way of understanding? Dad, calm down, okay?" He squeezed the bridge of his nose, closed his eyes, and took more soothing breaths with each harshness in tone and rise in voice of the legendary Cage. Hinata had grown increasingly frightened during their brief conversation. His eyes were more or less normal when he opened them again, but he was still clearly attempting to maintain self-control after looking at Hinata. He fixed his gaze on his son, however. It was obvious that he was speaking to her when he spoke. "They don't know about the curse yet, but once they do, it'll only get worse for him. It's true that they fear him because of the Kyuubi, but that's just part of it. What do you know about him?" Wella H. He's a Jinchuriki, which M means H. He has a B Biju sealed I in him, I in his C case. Th the Kyuubi W was S sealed by YU, right? This time, he erupted in laughter, and Naruto merely smiled pityingly at her. He shrugged and laughed nervously. The older blonde asked his boy a question after he had finally calmed down. "Is that really what they think nowadays?" He simply shrugged once more and lay down with his arms folded behind his head. "I don't think you should be complaining, though you're a legend now because of it, Dad. Still, I would prefer it more if they got the facts straight. No wonder they have difficulty understanding." With a sigh, Minato leaned back and extended his arms behind him to maintain his upright posture. When he noticed Hinata's perplexed expression, he gave her one last grin before explaining. "There is no way for a mere mortal to seal a Biju, not even the strongest enigma, even the Uzumakis of the Whirlpool. The most renowned seal users wouldn't be able to forcefully seal a Biju. The only reason they can be sealed is because they want to." That surprised her because it seemed so implausible that creatures as strong and powerful as a Biju would voluntarily consent to being sealed, especially when they are the ones who desire to be sealed. The Bijus are the most powerful beings that currently exist in our world. No one and nothing could best them, but because of the lack of opposition, they stagnated while all the other beings around them fought to survive and grew stronger and evolved. Their power remained in the level that they had when they finally noticed. They thought up of ways to stop it and break their stagnant selves. She gave him a nod to indicate that she was paying attention. She followed his eyes as he turned to face Naruto, and they both gazed at him for a long time. The first idea that came to them was to challenge each other. Unfortunately, that only brought disasters. Could you imagine the Bijus fighting against one another, tearing up their surroundings as a result? She shivered visibly as he took a moment to process the thought. Witnessing the full force of a Biju, which the elder generations described as already a catastrophe, was one thing. When you consider that much power clashing with creatures that were nearly equal to it, it was a whole other story, and the idea of all 9 of them fighting was absurd. The Kyuubi discovered the best way after consuming an older ancestor of the Uzumaki, a sealing expert. The Kyuubi learned about the sealing arts, and all the beasts believed that it would be their best way to get stronger, to allow themselves to be sealed into another being that could use their powers enough to allow them to get stronger. Disastrous, right? Well, after they realized that method would only bring about the end of the world, they took a different approach. It was a sound theory, and they ought to have produced the ideal seal with all of their combined knowledge and insight, right? After giving it some thought, Hinata found herself wondering the same thing. The creation of the ideal seal would undoubtedly result from the combined efforts of beings as strong and purportedly as wise as the Bijus. However, who is it ideal for? As though he could read her mind, Minato grinned. That's right, they could make the perfect seal, but they had different views of how the perfect seal is supposed to be. Not to mention these are proud beings, as if allowing themselves to be sealed isn't degrading enough, to allow themselves to be trapped in a seal created by the other Bijus. They didn't like that. So they each created their own seals, which was they would then teach someone they would deem worthy of their power. But weren't they you under the Shodem's sea control? Minato looked at her intently and laughed. Then, with a look that Hinata had never seen before, he turned to face Naruto, but the boy simply snorted. He shook his head in response to her query. You're right, they were all under the Shodem's thumb, So to speak, guess they all acknowledged his power and thought that he was deserving of their power, but the Shodem knew that he couldn't control all of them at once, and choosing only one Biju to have sealed in him would be an insult to the others, and that would be a catastrophe. He paused and turned to face her, seemingly encouraging her to go on with the tale. She had no idea what he was anticipating, but she assumed that this was where the history that had been told to them actually started to become true. The Shodem S sealed them in O objects with the H's abilities, which He then G gave O out to the other C countries as an S sign of peace. That's right, in the end, it was the best thing to do to divide them up. The Bijus didn't complain much, as long as they got a powerful host in return. But it was the Kyuubi who was the pickiest of them all. It didn't want just any powerful host. It also wanted a host who was knowledgeable in seals too, which basically means it wanted an Uzumaki as a host. Why is that? Because the Bijus teach the seals they created for themselves to their host. And while they all thought that their seals was the best, the Kyuubi was sort of a perfectionist and wanted its seal to be more than what the best, and since the Uzumakis were renowned as seal masters, it collaborated with them to further improve its seal. It was also a pretty smart fox, since it also meant that with the improvement of seal mastery over generations, its host would be able to work on its seal so long as she lived. Hinata's awe of the Bijus, particularly the Kyuubi, abruptly increased. She was aware of their intelligence, but it made her feel very small to think that the Kyuubi planned ahead while considering the potential for future generations. Soa, how does B being sealed H help them G get stronger? The more that their power is drawn upon by their hosts, the stronger they become. The Bijus are beings of chakra and yuki, and they produce chakra like any other normal creature. When their chakra is used, it's replenished, and at the same time, their limit grows. They could do the same on their own, but the problem is, even if they fight with other beings, they almost always use up only a small portion, which is then replenished and doubled, but because it was such an insignificant amount, they barely notice it. So, the Bijus are only using their H hosts to G grow stronger F faster than what they could N normally achieve. She glanced over at Naruto, a little alarmed by the implications. She was suddenly even more terrified of the Kyuubi, but in a different way. She was now worried about what would happen to Naruto if the Kyuubi ever decided to move on and change hosts, or how much power did the Kyuubi have over Naruto if he was being used by them. The idea that Naruto was merely a puppet personality created by the Kyuubi to exert more control or to give him more freedom to use his own chakra to gain strength made her heart ache. Don't worry, out of all the Bijus seals, the Kyuubi's is the best for us, not to mention it has been tweaked lots of times by previous hosts and seal masters since it was first created, so Naruto's completely safe. Her concerns were not entirely allayed, but at least the worry that Naruto wasn't truly Naruto was allayed when she realized that the previous hosts had contributed to the seal's improvement and that it was in their best interests. After all, she couldn't have worked on the seal to fit humans if the previous host hadn't been who she truly was. But it's not just the Kyuubi they're afraid of. When Naruto spoke up, she was taken aback. He sat up and, as if he were looking for something, met her gaze. He grinned when he was unable to see it. At least, it's not just the Kyuubi that they're afraid of. Even though they understand that the Kyuubi will not do anything to jeopardize its host, they can't help but feel afraid that it might still break out and take control of Naruto's power. Both of them ceased conversing and simply gazed at her as she gazed at both blondes. Her heart began to race once more. She was very near to his secret, so near to the cause of people's unreasonable fear and even more unreasonable hatred of him. She swallowed and licked her lips, noticing that her throat and lips had suddenly become dry. What is his P power that they're so wary of? The power he inherited from Maya, the power of an anomaly. She was grateful that they didn't need her to remind them to go on, because she was so excited that she was finding it hard to talk at this point. Anomaly is we don't really know what we are. We don't know our history. Our existence is a mess of complications, and it's never easy, especially with what we are able to do. He observed her expression and realized that he was only confusing her further. He let out a sigh of comprehension. I probably shouldn't have been so vague, he reflected, but then again, everything about us has always been like that. He looked at his son, who was still gazing up at the sky, and shook his head after giving her a quick glance. He kept his eyes on his son. Hinata, do you believe in hell? He couldn't see the astonishment and bewilderment on her face because he kept his gaze fixed on Naruto. She scowled as she considered how to respond to him. Hell? What does that have to do with anything? She looked for a few seconds at the fourth, who continued to look at his son, and then she looked down. The fact that he brought it up must be significant, she concluded. Do I believe in hell? She was unsure of her feelings on the subject. Believing in yukais, demons, or spirits was one thing because there are already records of interactions with them. Actually, The only evidence anyone would need to support the existence of such entities is the existence of the hidden villages, the origins of which are intimately linked to the emergence of the Enigma generation. However, Hell's existence is a completely different story. Some claim that the yukais are the embodiments of evil and human fears, while others claim that they all originated in Hell. Unfortunately, both theories are regarded as mere conjectures because there are no records of their origin that have offered any hard proof since they had previously discussed origins in history. She pondered whether that was the Hell they were referring to. However, the way he asked her caused her to question herself, considering that it might be the spiritual Hell he was alluding to, which is what religions always say is where the souls of the wicked go after they die. They're the same Hell though, I think. She didn't know what she believed. Anyways, simplifying her thoughts as much as possible, she shook her head and chose her response. I'm not as sure I believe in Hell, but I can't disprove that there isn't an Hell either. So I don't know. As it came to an end, her voice faded into a whisper, and she hung her head in embarrassment at the sound of her uncertain voice. She began to doubt herself as she always did, but as soon as he spoke, she looked at him. Well, I'm not really sure about all the talks about Hell, but it exists. He waited for a response from her, but all he received was a blank stare, so he went on. There are a lot of things wrong about what is written and what's known about Hell, but one thing is for sure, it's a place for demons, devils, and evil spirits. Simply put, it's a place for yukai, but it's not where most people think it is. She could see the darkness in his face before he caught himself and eased into his easy calm because she was staring at him intently. She considered asking him if he had been there, but she felt that it would be impolite nevertheless. He smiled at her with a weary expression that made him appear generations older. Yes, I've been there. It's thanks to our powers, as anomalies, that I had the unfortunate chance to visit it. It's a dark place where the air is thick with a miasma so foul. Just a whiff is enough to kill a man. The miasma also causes the atmosphere to be thick with yuki, empowering the dwellers of that realm. The yukai there are far beyond the level of the yukai we have. The strongest that I felt in my short visit there is about 10 times stronger than the kyubi. The thought of such a place and such powerful creatures made her shudder. She waited for him to elaborate because she was so engrossed in the story and wanted to know what it had to do with them. I bet you're thinking what that has to do with anomalies, right? Well, simple. Remember how we said that the kyubi was merely a part of why Naruto is treated by the villagers? Well, the main part of it is because of Hell. I'm not sure how much the villagers really know about it, but they know that we can access it. Although she thought it was only appropriate, she noticed how his voice abruptly became cold when he used the word treated. She wanted to be angry too, but she decided to hold off on deciding how she would feel until she had heard the whole story. Because why you are anomalies? How can why you get to that place though? And why would people think that Naruto would want to go there? Since we're already on that topic, let's answer your question of why they thought that Naruto would want to go there. The answer is actually simple, and with a bit of logic. You see, before this entire mess, people knew and believed the true origins of the Jinchuriki. They knew that the hosts were only being used by the Biju to get stronger. They also knew that an anomaly can access Hell, a place where yuki is abundant and can make any yukai stronger by just being in that place. She began to see things the way a scared persona, whether Enigma or Noto, would, and things fell into place. The Biju used humans in the form of Jinchuriki in order to gain strength, what would prevent the Biju from assuming control and compelling the host to transport the Jinchuriki to a location where their strength would be enhanced simply by breathing. Despite the fact that the seal has been designed and adjusted to function as efficiently as possible for the host, the fear destroyed the sense of security that the seal would provide. But if the Biju went into that place to get stronger, shouldn't the people want that to happen? Since it'll mean that the Biju will be stuck there? He sighed in frustration and shook his head. He ruffled the boy's hair with his hand before he spoke again. Fear is a funny thing. It makes people smart, but at the same time, it makes them brash and stupid. It would have been simple if their line of thought stopped there, but it didn't. They thought, what if the host was taken along to Hell? That would mean that the Biju would have a means to get back. Still no problem though, right? But they went over even that. What if the Biju returned and became a king of demons or something, and came with an army to enslave humanity? What if the Biju suddenly decided that it wanted to eat human flesh and came back, stronger than ever before? What if the Biju decided to test its new powers by destroying our world? There were so many what ifs that were formed, and their fear grew. She slowly nodded, fully comprehending their fears, although she didn't think Naruto would permit it. The reality is that the presence of the formidable Biju and the sinister location of Hell arouses unwelcome fear. She looked at her loved one and concluded that the reason she was thinking that way was because she knew too much about the things that made the boy who he was, but they never bothered to find out. If only they could see how kind you are, how strong your determination is and how you would always protect those weaker than you. Gently, she put her hand over the boy's and reached for him after glancing at her for a moment. He nodded and smiled slightly before turning back to the sky. She could at least try her best to help him get over the bad feelings now that she understood why the villagers behaved as they did. However, she had one more task to complete. She had to learn more about him. So, how can anomalies get to that place? Now that she knew more about hell and it had more significance in her world, she was uncomfortable talking about it. Neither blonde seemed to mind if they saw, and they didn't express it even if they did mind. Well, we're back at the beginning. What are anomalies? At least now, it's a lot simpler to answer. First though, I have a question for you. Where do you think hell is? The Hokage was able to startle and perplex her once more. Hell, where is it? She had nothing to say. He had previously stated that it wasn't where people believed it to be, but she had heard that it was supposed to be underground. Where was it, then? She didn't really know, so she shook her head at him. Hell is in an entirely different dimension. It's a world separate from us. The reason why we anomalies have access to it is because we're beings whose existence is tied with time and space, either that or we're constructs of time and space itself. But no matter what, we were given the power to bend space and time, so getting into the hell dimension is possible. She considered what he had said and she gave it some more thought. It was now expected that their generation and their world would be the strongest in history. The 10 Tails and the Sage of the 6 Paths, two formidable creatures who created the Biju and all the other creatures who would eventually elevate humanity to a completely new level of strength and power, were among the ancient legends they learned about. Even so, what the fourth was telling her seemed excessive given the already unbelievable things that ninjas and enigmas are aware of. She was aware of human origins, research theories, and the teachings of various religious leaders. Since she had witnessed Naruto become interested in this kind of history, she also became well versed in it in an effort to establish a connection with him. Although she has not yet approached the boy to discuss the subject, her reading has given her a thorough understanding of the subject, which should have given her the level of openness she needs to accept what the Hokage told her. However, she simply cannot seem to accept it. She was aware that humans either evolved from the same ancestors as monkeys, according to researchers, or were formed from dirt and clay and given life by a god of an earlier religion. There was even a tiny group of people who believe in a combined theory of evolution and a god. According to this theory, a god from a mountain gave fire to a group of primates, teaching them survival skills that no other animal could ever learn. This allowed the primates to evolve into modern humans. Even more bizarre theories about evolution and gods exist, but they all share the fact that man discovered temptation and evil and destroyed the world. The 10 Tails were made in order to rid the world of evil. Its purpose was to absorb all the evil and transform it into energy that would aid in the restoration of the world and nature after man destroyed them. But the evil was too great. The evil corrupted the 10 Tails, driving it insane and into a destructive rage that nearly destroyed the entire universe. A savior emerged from the wreckage and confronted the beast amid the mayhem. The savior took the shape of a man with extraordinary strength. Though not enough to destroy it, that power was sufficient to defeat the 10 Tails. Rather, the savior's forceful sealing of the beast's life force and energy into himself created the first Jinchuriki ever. He transformed the beast's body into the moon using his newly acquired strength. Then the savior went to work rebuilding the world, reviving the earth and nature. He was dubbed the Sage of the 6 Paths because of the amazing miracles he performed, which led people to believe he was a godlike figure. The world was rebuilt over time, and life has since returned. People eventually saw the sage as a mortal who was only blessed by a god when his body broke down. Despite the fact that he was revered as someone who was close to a god, his body was unable to withstand the beast's strength, and the years of mistreatment it had suffered during the world's reconstruction were too much. He split the beast into what became known as the tailed beasts, the Biju, out of fear that it might be released with his death. The strain had already reached its peak. Despite the 10 Tails' energy and life force being released, then his body disintegrated into millions of fragments. Parts of the sage's abilities were contained in those pieces, which somehow materialized as distinct entities. That was the tale of the first Yukai and Hani Ou, who subsequently transmitted their skills over the years until Enigmas was born. As more and more details emerged, making an effort to fit them into the missing puzzle piece that would enable her to see into the world the fourth was discussing, her mind was now racing. Was the sage capable of bending space and time? Legend had it that he could bend reality and make his thoughts come to life out of nothing, and although it was beyond anything the world had ever experienced, it was still a part of their world. The fact that it dealt with different dimensions and eras didn't make it so distinct from their reality. Did the anomalies also arise from the sage's body if he truly possessed abilities over space and time? Or did the anomalies exist even before sage's time? If so, why didn't they interfere with any global events, and what was their goal? Or did they have a hand in the events that history did not know about? She had more questions. The more she considered them, she would have to believe the fourth's assessment of them to be accurate. The realization came to her when she noticed a sense of understanding in his eyes. Flashback. Anomaly is a well, we don't really know what we are, rather, we don't know our history. Our existence is a mess of complications, and it's never easy, especially with what we are able to do. End of flashback. They likely had as many questions about themselves as she did, since he had said that even they were unaware of their past, the fact that they would have begun to doubt themselves sooner and that it would follow them around for the rest of their lives until they discovered the solution was even worse for them. Though she never intended to ask the question she was thinking, she wanted to know. Why you don't know anything about your history? No family records? Before he responded, he shook his head. We have family records, but like I said, nothing is ever simple with anomalies, and everything is complicated. He smiled slightly at her and let out another weary sigh. He extended his hands in front of him and observed the flexion and curl of his fingers. Our family records, they aren't passed down from one generation to the next in the form of writing or stories, they're passed on in death. With his elbows resting on his knees, he buried his face in his hands. She knew they were approaching a challenging subject when he sighed again. When an anomaly dies, the memories, knowledge, experiences, power and strength that were gained are turned into an essence that is then received by the next oldest living anomaly. Unfortunately, over the years, less and less of us would die. Are you immortal? His eyes were wide with surprise at her outburst, but even the sage had been shown to be mortal, so he didn't blame her. When he recovered from his shock, he laughed. In a way, yes, we are immortal of sorts, but that immortality comes at a price. It comes with a terrible price. This time, she could tell they had reached the challenging subject by the anguish in his eyes and the sorrow on his face. It was heartbreaking for her to see him staring at Naruto with sadness. Those who don't die and become immortal turned out that way not because they wanted to. They become like me, or I've become like them. She noticed that he wasn't really looking at her, even though he forced his eyes to shift from his son to her. He spoke as though he was recalling a melancholy memory, and his eyes were distant. We don't die because we lose our place here, and our powers take over. We become timeless, and we become drifters. He balled his hands into fists and looked down at them. He ignored the shimmering sensation in and out of his body. He was aware that his anchor was still attached and that he would continue to have control over his abilities until he fulfilled the condition. His heart tightened with each word he spoke, and he struggled to stop the tears from streaming down his face. Can you imagine the power that we hold, princess? He didn't see her wince at the way he addressed her because he wasn't looking at her. He inhaled deeply as the silence dragged on. That's right, it's hard to believe that our powers allow us to bend time and space, but it's all true. The thing is, the next amazing thing that comes to mind is how strong our kind are to be able to control such a power. He looked up and did his best to concentrate on her, but his vision would always haze and he would end up staring at the far-off darkness. The thing is, there is a limit to our control at birth. We're given only one aspect of our powers. Either power over time or space. There has been only person that has had both aspects from birth. He glanced at Naruto from the side and stared at him for a few seconds before turning back to the distance. The rest of us acquire more of our powers as we mature. The more life experiences we accumulate, the stronger our powers become. We have total control over our powers for a while, but after we reach a certain age, they begin to take over. They begin as little tugs here and there, but eventually they become a powerful pull on our lives. Our powers take over, making us timeless and compelling us to drift from something we can manage to something we can no longer resist. Thena and Naruto-kun as well. Before responding, he smiled wearily. If he lives long enough, then it'll eventually happen, but with the way he's now with 3 different Yuki, it may either be sooner or much later than usual. OONN Noah. Although he could hear her sniffing, he was unable to summon the strength to try to console her. Rather, he carried on with his tale. The world works in strange ways. Really, our God or the gods, or whatever our kind was made and born, blessed with powers that could potentially shape and mold the future any way we want, but we were also made so that our powers would take over once it grows enough, and then, we were given a way to stabilize that power, through our own anchor. Dada. It's okay, Naruto, it seems like this talk can help extend my anchor here. He glanced at his son, nodding and grinning slightly. His smile widened as he glanced at Hinata, who once again had a perplexed expression on her face. She's really cute. Too bad my boy's too dense to notice. He nodded slightly and offered her a fresh cloth from his supply pack to dab at her tears. After giving his father a worried glance, Naruto nodded in return and went back to observing the sky. An anchor is someone who helps stabilize our powers, effectively binding us to this time and dimension as long as they live. We don't know if anchors are made for each anomaly, or if it's something like destiny or fate. He stopped telling his story and sighed deeply while he was silent. Naruto asked a question that had been bothering him ever since he discovered the anchor of an anomaly. Hey, Dad. Mom's your anchor, right? How did you find her? I mean, how did you know she was your anchor? He gave his boy a smile before turning to face the forest's darkness. He grinned slowly, and although it was a genuine smile with a tinge of joy, Hinata thought it appeared somewhat depressing. However, Naruto was aware that there was more than sadness in that smile, there was longing. Have I ever told you that she's the reason why I was forced to become a ninja? Hinata was taken aback by Naruto's shocked expression when she looked at him. What do you mean forced to become a ninja? He chuckled a little before responding. Well, let's put it this way, have you ever heard of an anomaly ninja? Both Naruto and Hinata searched for a historical ninja with the abilities the fourth described, but were unable to come up with any. They tried to think of someone who was known to have done things like bend time and space, or something similar, but they were unable to come up with anyone. Exactly, anomalies have been doing their best to keep a low profile, passing themselves off as normal people, or simply isolating themselves from society. Even when the world was torn apart by wars and disasters, there were never any sightings of anomalies recorded ever. Until you. That's right, there were never any sightings of anomalies recorded in history, until I came along. And you're telling me that that was Mom's fault? As he observed his son's disbelieving expression, his smile widened. How about I tell you how I met your mother, okay? Please tell me this isn't a sappy love story or an over-glorified version of your conquest for Mom's heart, or something like that. As his son expressed his unease with a blank expression, he couldn't help but laugh. No, none of that. It was just a normal day for a normal orphan roaming the village. Oh, orphan? Yes, like I said, anomalies try to keep a low profile, and the only way for me to pass as a normal kid in society was to pretend that I was orphaned. Rewind. A young child was navigating the crowded village streets. While navigating the cacophonous market district crowds, he ducked down a street he knew would be less crowded. He called out to a person he recognized standing next to an apple cart. Hey, Uncle Fu. The man waved for him to approach after giving him a big smile. Why, hello, young Minato-kun, fancy an apple? After giving a nod, the blond boy received a bright red apple. The child crunched into the fruit and gave the man a small thank you as Minato was eating his apple. They chatted for a while before a cart toppled over and someone yelled, "My cabbages! I'm sorry." Minato's world abruptly changed when she heard the voice. He tried to look in the direction of the voice, but he had no idea what it meant. He lost his balance and dropped his apple after someone bumped into him. By the time he turned to face the disturbance, however, his vision was obscured by a sea of long, flowing red hair, making it impossible for him to see who had bumped into him. He could still feel himself unsteady and attempting to catch himself. After the red faded, he used his eyes to scan his surroundings and noticed that everyone was staring at him with bewildered expressions. He understood why people were staring at him. After shifting his foot to keep from falling on his back, his time is distorted to a sluggish crawl. He glanced at his apple, which was still in the air but was obviously falling very slowly. After closing his eyes and taking a deep breath, he moved to grab his apple as soon as he felt his time was beginning to return to normal. Even he was surprised when he caught his apple in a sudden burst of speed. Before the onlookers could see it, he looked in awe at his hands and at his apple, trying to understand what had happened. I'm sorry, but I'm late. When he heard the voice, he looked up to see who it belonged to. He was able to catch a glimpse of red hair vanishing around the corner. While he was looking around, he ran as fast as he could, pretending to be a regular boy, and when he turned the corner, he saw the red hair vanishing into another alley once more. No matter how fast he ran without drawing attention to himself, he was only ever able to catch glimpses of the person he was trying to follow. He kept running, panting lightly. He looked around him when he heard another commotion in the street around the corner, and when he saw no one, he used some of his power to accelerate. Before he knew it, he had turned right and reached the corner. I'm sorry, but I'm really late, I'm really sorry. Leaping over fallen boxes and ducking under stalls, he ran in the direction of the voice. As he arrived at the academy's gates, he caught another glimpse of the red hair vanishing into the structure. A Chunin blocked his path as he attempted to run after her. What do you want, kid? You don't look like a student here. He glanced back at the academy. After glancing up at the Chunin, he tried to catch his breath so he could respond, but it was taking too long, so he simply waved goodbye and shook his head. He sucked on the juice and bit into his apple. As he left, he turned around for a final glance and made the decision to start with a single question in order to decipher the strange events that transpired in his life today. Who was the kid with the red hair? Final flashback. I went to the Hokage after that, asking if I could get into the academy. The good news was, it was easy convincing him to allow me, and the bad news was that I had to let him know about some of my abilities and where I got them. So you are revealed that why you were an anomaly? Not exactly. See, I was still trying to keep a low profile, So I just told him that I received a blessing that just recently manifested. I told him about the incident of my time slowing down, and thanks to all the witnesses, they bought it once I was in. Well, let's just say that the rest is history. You mean you fell in love while trying to figure out what happened and then won her heart and blah blah? Hinata sighed and had a dreamy expression as Naruto questioned the story. How romantica? Minato scratched the back of his neck, trying to think of the right words to describe the situation. Well, not exactly, you see. There were no anomalies before me that passed on their essence to me, so the only idea I had about anchors was from the few small talks with my mom. Just like how we are right now, she told me that my father wasn't her anchor, but her best guy friend was going with that explanation. I concluded that your anchor doesn't necessarily need to be your lover, just someone important in your life. He glanced at them both, and their expressions were blank, indicating that they were unable to follow his explanation. Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat things and say that your mother was the most perfect woman in all dimensions. In fact, she was the exact type of person that I wouldn't be good with. She was talented in seals and ninjutsu. I can give her that, but she was also very reckless, uncontrollable, stubborn and rebellious with her attitude. I decided to just keep her at a comfortable distance. It started out as sparring partners, and then as a mentor-pupil thing in seal work later on. She became the one I would discuss some of my ninjutsu and seal theories with after that. I did my best to keep our relationship to just that, but something happened that put us together. It wasn't until he finished his story that he realized he was breathing heavily. It wasn't until he was done that he realized his feelings had poured into his words because he was so intent on telling them about his situation and intentions. When he talked about Naruto's mother's actions, his voice had risen, and when he described the development of their relationship, it had begun to soften. He glanced at the two again and saw that their responses to his outburst differed. Hinata had another dreamy expression, and Naruto was making a concerted effort to hide his smile. He raised his hands in surrender and sighed in defeat. He underestimated Hinata's maiden heart, but he chose to let them reflect on whatever it was that brought them together. The kidnapping at that's what brought you together. For a long moment, a smile slowly appeared on his face as he gazed at her. He laughed heartily and then gave himself permission to express himself in a dreamy way. Yeah, that's what put us together. Despite her tomboyish tendencies, deep inside she was still a woman. Especially in her heart she believed in destiny and fate, only in terms of love. Once she got that in her head, there was no way to convince her otherwise. She started acting more feminine around me, even going so far as seducing me. He sighed again, and his smile had become silly this time. When combined with his dreamy expression, Naruto thought he looked like a lovesick fool. Your mother's crazy, but she was quite a woman. I ended up falling for her, and falling real hard. He concentrated on a sobering thought and shook his head to get rid of the pleasant memories. His face was filled with regret and sadness as he gazed at his son. And that's why you weren't able to transfer the anchor to me, right? But that doesn't mean I don't love you, son, because I do. I really do. Minato felt his heart beginning to ache once more as Naruto shook his head, but the pain vanished as soon as the boy grinned. It's okay, Dad. I used to think that you didn't care about me, that you chose not to anchor to me, but seeing you with that idiotic lovesick look on your face, I can at least sort of understand why you weren't able to let go of Mom's anchor. So we're cool. Just one thing, Thaw. What is it? Don't you ever make that lovesick face again. It's weird enough that I've seen it, and embarrassing that Hinata-chan had to see it. Come on, old man, you're not young anymore. He looked at Naruto blankly, wondering how he had forgotten whose child he was. Ruffling his hair as roughly as he could, he grabbed him by the neck and pulled him into a headlock. I'll have you know, since I'm now timeless, I'm still technically young, not to mention I wasn't that old when it happened. Okay, just don't do it when I'm around people, it's embarrassing. After letting his son go, they exchanged a smile and burst out laughing. Hinata was astounded by the two blondes' strength as she observed their father-son interaction. She was grateful for Naruto's sake, but she was also shocked by how they made fun of such serious and depressing subjects in their lives. As she looked at him and his father laughing, she became aware of how much Naruto brightened her life, and she couldn't help but smile. Naruto couldn't resist grinning back at Hinata when he saw her kind smile. In the brief moment when their eyes met and they exchanged a smile, neither of them realized that time was bending around them in a way Minato was familiar with. So, overcoming the trial, huh? And both phases too, now that's my boy. His pride grew as he turned to face his father. Even though he was aware that he would always be proud of him, he still wished he could express it the way his classmates' parents did. Even though he wanted to savor the moment, he was aware that he couldn't claim all the glory he did, after all, have a lot of assistance from someone. Yeah, well, I had a lot of help. When he pointed to Hinata with his eyes, his father's expression changed to one of confusion. How exactly did she help? This time, the memories came flooding back, and he was once again in awe. He recalled the way her voice soothed him, even calming the snarling wolf. He recalled how, when the curse's Yuki was energized by the Kyubis, she boldly clung to his neck even though he had gotten so incredibly big. Oh man. You should have seen it, Dad. She was incredible and brave. She tamed the wolf like it was a puppy, soothing it with her words and voice, and then, she didn't back down when the Kyubi's Yuki suddenly flowed all over my body and mixed with the wolf's. You should have seen it. Even I thought it was unbelievable, how the two Yukis worked together in making me stronger. It made me huge, but it didn't scare Hinata one bit. He didn't realize Hinata's face was turning to bright shades of red because he was too preoccupied with reliving his experiences and attempting to put them into words for his father. Additionally, he was blind to the fact that his father was looking at Hinata with a serious, thoughtful expression on his face. I got through the second phase thanks to Hinata and through the first phase thanks to Toa. Both of Naruto's companions noticed him stumbling away. He jumped up and yelled as they turned to face him. Ah, Haruka-sensei, I forgot to see if he was all right. Raising his nose, he sniffed the air. As far as he could tell, the Kyubi was still asleep, but his senses had already been permanently improved from all the years that its chakra had been pulsing through his veins and throughout his body. His senses were further enhanced by the fact that he could already feel the curse's permanent effects. He could concentrate them on a single task for the time being, but it would take some getting used to. He smelled something faint and turned to sniff more deeply. He sprinted in its direction as soon as he was certain there was a faint trail. However, he was briefly blinded by a flash of yellow before he could exit the clearing and venture into the dense woods. He felt as though he was being pulled through a tunnel when something grabbed hold of the collar of his jacket. He was flung onto the ground on his back as they emerged from that tunnel. Relax, he's okay. I'm guessing he's the one who's been watching us for a little while now, so at least he seems well enough to walk around and keep stealthy. He opened his eyes, glanced at his father, and saw him nod in a particular direction. When he looked in the direction his father had indicated, he noticed that the fallen tree was there. Even with his improved night vision and enhanced vision, he was unable to see anything outside the clearing. Despite his best efforts to see through the darkness, the only clue he could find that someone was there, alerting him to his presence, was the rustle of leaves. The fourth put his hand on his shoulder just as he was about to yell at the individual. There's a reason why he stayed away and tried not to bother us. I think I know what it is, and if what I'm thinking is correct, then I am grateful to him as we don't have much time left. His entire body shimmered and his hand moved through Naruto as though to emphasize what he was saying. To keep himself steady, he pulled it back and concentrated his abilities. When Naruto noticed his father struggling, he took hold of his arm and tried to concentrate, using his own anomaly abilities to keep his father grounded. If only temporarily. They both collapsed to their knees, exhausted and gasping from the exertion. Once the fourth's form stabilized and he became physically solid. We don't have mucha time, yeah. In between breaths, both blondes wheezed out what they were saying. Hinata, meanwhile, was unsure of how she could assist them. She was still strong enough to perform a brief transformation to help them relax, but she wasn't sure if that would improve or worsen their situation. She opened her mouth to speak, but Minato apparently saw her and interrupted. We're okay, we're just a bit of windada. Yeah, just give USA a minute or two. She began pressing her fingers together since she had run out of things to say or do. She attempted to occupy her hands by playing with Naruto's jacket after becoming abruptly aware of what she was doing. When the fourth finally caught his breath and spoke up, she was just praising the clothing's craftsmanship and wondering what kind of fabric it was made of. Well, at least we know you're still an anomaly like your old man. Although Hinata thought the statement was odd, she was hesitant to inquire. She learned that if the Hokage wanted to, he could tell her the specifics. She was unaware, however, that the fourth were simply reading her facial expressions, even this time. What I meant is, his anomaly powers are still separated from the curse. Well, at least some of it. She felt that the fourth was attempting to initiate the conversation this time, so she felt it was appropriate to reply. What do you mean? And now that the S seal is broken, shouldn't his anomaly powers be back as well? Well, that's true, Aya, but the problem is how the seal worked. When he noticed his son's serious expression, the older blonde stopped and asked a question instead of asking him to explain. Naruto? What's wrong? He appeared to be startled out of his reverie by the mention of his name, and he glanced at his father for a moment before turning his attention back to the shadowy forest. It's just, now that I'm paying attention, I can't sense anything from beyond this clearing. It's like I'm surrounded by sounds of life in here, right? But when I try to stretch out, it's all silent, like the forest is completely dead. No rustling leaves, no wind, there isn't even a scent. Yeah, well, Naruto looked at his father, taking it as a surprise that he had an explanation. He caught him staring at Hinata as though he was aware of something. Conversely, Hinata was observing her hands as they investigated his jacket. He wasn't sure whether she had anything to contribute to their conversation or if she was concealing something. This clearing is sort of separate from the forest, at least, While we're here, I guess? Or for the night? I'm not Soraya, all I know is, it's like a different place here and now it's a safe place, it's a sacred place. Naruto believed that there was more to it than that, and that although his father was aware of it, he wasn't qualified to elaborate. There seemed to be more about Hinata that he needed to learn. When he looked at her normally, he detested the feeling of having an unsolved puzzle bother him, but this time, he felt comfortable working on this enigma. He was actually a little pleased about it, which baffled him. So, Naruto want to explain how the seal works. It's a special kind of seal, one that my mom and dad made. Actually, it was still just a work in progress when I used it on you. You're the first living case of the seal working properly. Thinking that they had avoided discussing the clearing, Hinata glanced up from Naruto's jacket when she noticed the abrupt pause in conversation. She noticed that Naruto was exhibiting a range of facial expressions. He appeared perplexed for a moment, then as though he was considering his options, then irate, then slightly irritated, and finally confused again. Hinata looked at the older blonde and was once more astounded by the remarkable similarity between the two when she believed that he would not be displaying any other expression anytime soon. The Hokage was grinning sheepishly and scratching the back of his head, just like Naruto would do if he was feeling anxious or caught in the middle of a mischievous act. You're telling me that the seal wasn't tested when you used it on me? Hinata had never heard a growl in his voice before, but he was pinching the bridge of his nose when she looked at him. She chose to remain silent and listen instead of laughing at the role reversal the two were engaging in because she knew it was too serious. What are you talking about? I would never do something as reckless and stupid like that. Either unaware of his father's defensive tone or simply not caring, Naruto simply shrugged before responding. Something stupid and reckless. I do those lots of times. Something dangerous to other people thought. Yeah, you get that from your mother and it wasn't dangerous, okay. The concept of it was already in use for my flying thunder god, as well as the seal techniques of the Uzumakis, but the theory of it being applied to seal in a different being was brand new. I'll bet mom has rubbed off on you more than you want to admit to. When Naruto muttered something, the older blonde simply brushed it off. Although he would not publicly acknowledge it, he did believe that Kushina's influence had a significant impact on him. The seal was tested and reworked lots of times, but because those were just tried on inanimate objects to seal in other inanimate objects, we couldn't tell whether the seal was working or not. The seal I used on you is the farthest we got while testing out on objects. While the older blonde sighed resignedly and simply gazed defiantly at his son, Naruto folded his arms across his chest and sat down to glare at his father. So now that that's out of the way, how about explaining the seal? Naruto remained motionless for a few seconds. He began to speak just as Hinata was about to stop him from speaking. The seal that they theorized, Naruto began, using the word theorized in a derisive manner. Minato interrupted him because of this. Hey, I made it work. It's something that even the professor found interesting. The older blonde pulled at his hair in exasperation as Naruto simply snorted at his father. Minato made the decision to explain the seal himself when the silence became so thick that Hinata began to feel uncomfortable. Do you know how ordinary seals work, princess? The use of F formulas, T to create S set functions, A and T to use writing, T to set limitations. All M made into an S system to K keep the S seal S stable. F finally, O once the S seal is R ready. The application U uses CH chakra to C carry out the F functions and T to F fortify A and close off the entire S system. That's right, sealing used to be a clan-specific technique that only the Uzumakis were capable of. Most likely they also came to be from the sage's body that broke apart. Only in their case, they got the strong life force of the sage with the ability of sealing as a bonus. She nodded, not really understanding because it felt like there was so much information in her head now. She didn't really understand how seals worked and only recited what she remembered from an academy textbook, but she made every effort to learn about the field because it was so important to her, especially to her family. She wants to benefit from having someone who is knowledgeable about the subject give her some information about it, even if it's just tidbits of trivia and facts, because she knows from experience that reading about seals won't help you master it. She calmed her thoughts and shook her head, clearing her mind so she could take in what the fourth had to say next. So ordinary seals usually work like that, utilizing the user's chakra to function and work, but Naruto's seal, the one I used to hold off the curse, works in a different way. One thing though, why do you think I didn't use the same seal that the Kyuubi uses? There is no way for a mere mortal to seal a Biju, not even the strongest enigma. Even the Uzumakis of the Whirlpool, the most renowned seal users, wouldn't be able to forcefully seal a Biju. The only reason they can be sealed is because they want to. B because you, unlike the K Kyuubi who L let itself be sealed. The C curse doesn't W want to be sealed? Correct. Wow, Naruto, Cute and smart, you better take good care of the princess, okay? Looking at the two, the older blonde made a big joke out of their extreme blushing. He chuckled to himself, then collected himself and went on with the explanation. So no matter how strong the Kyuubi's seal is, it won't be ideal for a forced sealing attempt. So I used the seal that me and his mom worked on. The theory behind it was, if we were going to seal something into someone else, why not utilize the chakra of that person that we're sealing into? That was the basic theory, but Kushina took it up a notch. She thought about a method of containing powerful and destructive beings inside someone as dangerous as they are, using their chakra and or yuki to completely seal the being and at the same time, sealing the host's own abilities. This way, two dangerous factors are removed and you're left with an ordinary human cage. Hinata gave a nod of agreement. It was a seal that would eliminate two potentially harmful elements, leaving only one potentially less dangerous individual. Theoretically, it was a perfect way to eliminate threats, particularly if the two threats' skills would balance each other out and restrain each other. So Naruto-sa? Yes, I used Naruto's anomaly yuki to seal the curse. It was supposed to have been a permanent fix, but apparently, the curse was too strong for Naruto's already unbelievable anomaly powers. I guess as powerful as they were, his powers were still undeveloped. But I didn't feel all that strong before? The fourth sighed and considered the best way to describe it. Okay. First, anomaly powers have two aspects, which are time and space. When we are born, in order for our powers not to lose control, we are limited to one aspect, acquiring the second as our powers grow. I was born a space anomaly, and even now, I haven't quite gotten the time aspect fully under control. You, however, were born with both. Minato interrupted Naruto as he was about to protest that he couldn't even perform a blink at the time. Now, talking in ranks, an anomaly is usually born with an academy-level power in one of the two aspects. I was born academy-level space, my mom was born academy-level time, but you were born with a civilian level in both time and space. By the time you got the curse was normally when our powers grows to genin level, and with that rank, space anomalies are able to use blink. The problem with you at the time was, since you were born with civilian level time and space, your level at the time was only academy level. After giving it some thought, Naruto gave in. Although he wanted to claim that he didn't feel strong at the time, he ultimately concluded that having both facets of their power at such a young age might make a significant difference. However, he did not yet consider himself strong. Not when I'm still in his shadow. Hinata made the decision to resume the conversation on Naruto's seal while he was considering his options, and Minato waited for his son to ask any more questions. So why you used Naruto-kun's anomaly yuki F for the seal? The Hokage was brought back to the subject by her tiny voice, which broke the lull between the two blondes. Yeah, that's right, the seal worked perfectly. The problem was with the curse. It was too strong to be sealed off completely by using the seal. We were only able to keep it asleep for a while, but in that respect, the seal worked in a way that surpassed what we know. Hinata was aware that any unexpected behavior by a seal, whether positive or negative, could be harmful. She gave Naruto a worried look. Isn't that dangerous? After giving it some thought, Minato had to agree after giving her a somewhat shocked look. Yeah, you're right, it was a good thing that I decided against using the Kyuubi's yuki, not that the Kyuubi will let me seal it up. What do you mean? The seal worked in a way we never even knew was possible. It used the yuki not just as a power source, but to also add a new function to the seal based on the yuki's properties. In this case, the seal used the space aspect of Naruto's anomaly yuki to lock the curse in a distorted dimension, making it as though the curse has been removed but is still actually there. Also, it used the time aspect to sort of confuse the cycle of the curse but still allow the two yuki to grow along with Naruto. Thanks to that, the seal was able to delay the inevitable release of the curse while still allowing both powers to grow to their potential. And that's where the problem now started, right? That's right, Naruto, that's where your current situation started to form. The fourth sighed and began to rub his temples, expressing to them how much of a headache it was for him. The seal was not intended to temporarily seal something, but to be a permanent lock. But because of the strength of the curse, that's what happened. And with the seal acting in a way that was far beyond what it was designed for, it caused a strange reaction within it. Instead of using the yuki to work as power source and strength for the block, it used it to interact with the other element. This interaction caused the two separate entities to be bonded in a way this wouldn't be a problem if the entire matrix worked in completely shutting down whatever was sealed inside, but since both entities were to be released at one point or Anothera. Minato began to scratch his head, obviously annoyed by the subject. Hinata was still unable to identify the true issue, but she was able to deduce from the fourth's explanation that it was more of an annoyance for both blondes than a serious threat. So, what is the problem? Well, Now that the curse is out and both phases of the trial have been completed, Naruto can use both his werewolf and anomaly powers. The problem is, they were bonded because of the seal for such a long time that now that when they were released, it was like they were one thing to start with. Hinata only needed to recall what Minato had previously stated in order to solve the puzzle, as the last piece had finally fallen into place. Flashback. Well, at least we know you're still an anomaly like your old man. What I meant is, his anomaly powers are still separated from the curse, well, at least some of it. Flashback end. So that's W what Y you meant H his anomaly P powers are N now connected T to H his W werewolf powers. After confirming with a nod, the fourth went on to explain. That's right, what that means is that in order for him to use his anomaly powers fully, he needs to be in his werewolf form, but because of some unknown factor, most likely something to do about the trial, a little bit of his anomaly powers are still separate from the curse, so there's still hope for him to have complete control of his anomaly powers. At that moment, Naruto had a startling realization that made him yell in horror. Wait a minute. If I can only use my full anomaly powers if I'm in werewolf form, and I can't show my werewolf form until I've proven I'm not going to bring the end of the world, then that means so. Minato was taken aback by his son's sudden nervousness and gazed at him with wide eyes. The boy had a dejected expression on his face as he stared at his hands, his whole body trembling. Even though he was aware that the scene was inappropriate for both his and her son, he still reached out to try to console him in spite of the little voice in the back of his mind. What is it, N? That means I can't show off my true power to those that think I'm dead last. Taken aback by the ridiculousness of his son's thoughts about the grave issue, he stumbled and fell forward. Landing face first on the floor, he got up and made an effort to control his annoyance, something he didn't think he would ever have to do again. Yua! His fist was slamming into his son's thick skull with all of his annoyance. You idiot! What kind of nonsense are you even thinking? This is a serious matter and that's all you're talking about? Naruto wasn't one to lose a shouting match, so he fought back the tears and nursed the newly formed bump on his head. What are you talking about? You don't get it, old man. Everyone thinks I'm the dead last because of the seal acting up every time I'm in a serious and important activity. Now that the seal won't be doing that anymore, I wanted to show them I'm not a dead last and that I can really become a Hokage. Minato wanted to be angry, but he can't hold his son responsible for his thoughts. Instead, he chose to try to lift his boy's spirits by shaking his head and letting out a loud sigh. Well, like I said, there are still some of your anomaly powers separate from your werewolf powers. What that means is that you have a small portion to work with. You're going to have to practice and train yourself really hard in focusing and using that small bit. That way, with growth and mastery, you'll be able to separately use your full anomaly powers. He kept a close eye on his son to see how he would respond. He only gave the impression that he was considering things for a while. He was a patient man, but his son's silence still made him a little nervous. At last he sighed and closed his eyes before speaking. Well, I guess all I have to do is keep training, right? But hey, I love training, so it's no problem. Minato felt relieved when she saw his toothy smile. He was aware that Naruto had been struggling to cope with the stress of concealing the curse and the sadness that came from having a piece of himself locked away. In addition, the boy was eager to be able to utilize all of his skills and abilities. Nevertheless, he was still in awe of his son's strength. He was smiling as he accepted that he would have to maintain his sealed image because people would never comprehend it, and that he would have to put in a lot of effort to train both his Jinchuriki and anomaly powers. Going forward, the tiny smile of contentment and joy that tugged at his lips was unavoidable. Kushina, can you see this? Our boy is just as strong as you are. A sharp tug in his stomach jolted him out of his reverie, and he realized then that it was not a good idea to think about her now. He hastily produced a scroll from inside his coat. When Naruto caught it, he threw it to him and drew him in for a hug. Looks like the anchor's up, son. I'll be seeing you next time, okay? As he kissed Hinata's hand, he drew his boy nearer to him with his other hand and gave him a one-arm embrace. Please take care of him for me, okay? With a determined expression on her face, the Hyuga heiress nodded. He whispered a final message to his son while looking down at him and kissing him on the head. You watch yourself, alright? And you'd better take care of the princess? He released both children and moved away after sensing his son nod. They both waved back. When he waved at them, he watched the two side by side, smiling and waving at him, and the contented smile came back. He felt a chill go up his spine as he turned to return to the forest. He glanced in one direction and then back at his boy. His expression must have indicated that something was amiss because Naruto's smile faltered. It was too late for him to warn him and call out to him. He was flung into a different dimension of a different world of a different time, his cries resonating through the emptiness of time and space as his powers overtook him and dragged him away. He floated through the chilly, cacophonous quiet. His mind was consumed by an odd feeling, so the hushed words and whispered shouts were ignored. He recalled the icy sensation, the tingle that warned him that something was amiss. He scanned his surroundings, but he could see nothing. His eyes appeared to be glazed over, and he was looking off into space. He was turning and tossing, drifting through oblivion, floating through the emptiness. Abruptly, he was raised to his feet and his surroundings were illuminated. When he finally managed to see after blinking, he was taken aback by what he saw. "Mom?" Even though he spoke, the voice wasn't Hisa, at least not right now. He took another look around, noting how many of them there were in that void. As he reached the hundreds, his emotions were tangled in knots as he attempted to count them. When he eventually realized that they were all just standing there, gazing into space, he was still counting. His heart began to race for no apparent reason, and he was having trouble breathing when he stepped back. Everyone else did the same. He was struggling for even the slightest breath. As his breathing became more labored, he stepped back again, and the others followed suit. Something was dragging him from behind. Even though he wanted to stop, he took another step back, and stumbled backwards as his foot struck something on the smooth floor. He regained his balance and looked around the ground to see what had tripped him, but nothing was there, as he had suspected. Then he sensed it. He sensed the other people's looks. He glanced around and up. Not yet, anyway, and none of them were looking at him. He wasn't foolish. Though he caught sight of them, he could see how they would turn to face him with each step he took back, and he realized that they would all be staring at him if he took just one more step back. He was unwilling to move. He desired to remain there. He sensed that something was off with the situation. He was afraid because he knew it was risky. However, his foot left the ground and began to creep behind him in spite of his feelings and his logical reasoning. Slowly, the others began turning that last corner. Daring himself to pull, he grabbed his hair and began to tug. However, his body was not paying attention. He clenched his jaw, closed his eyes, and took that final step. He closed his eyes and gritted his teeth for what felt like an eternity. He waited and waited. He opened one eye when the tension became too much for him to handle. He looked around and saw that nothing was going on. He opened both eyes with a sigh of relief, but then the headache struck, blinding him with white light, followed by a terrifying roar of cries. Flash! He was startled awake. After a few seconds of waiting, he relaxed and sighed in relief. Then he used his borrowed eyes to scan the room, making sure that no one else was there. When he was unable to locate anyone, he peered through a ceiling opening at the night sky. His body began to shimmer, and he grinned as he reveled in the euphoria this brief encounter had brought him. Unfortunately, he felt someone approach his doorway, so his celebration had to end. Two men entered without knocking. Although they were both composed people, he was aware that they both concealed a strength that even he would find difficult to resist. He turned to face the man with the long, dark hair in a braid, who was looking at his mature Sharingan's 3 tomos. He was shocked to learn that his direct descendant, and perhaps the most intelligent Uchiha in their family's history, was born with such a weak appearance. The other man spoke calmly as he gazed at the younger Uchiha, who only seemed uninterested in the attention. It would seem as though he has revealed himself. In front of his subordinates, he wanted to roll his eyes, but that would not be appropriate. He made himself take on the role of superior, instead of concentrating on the eyes with rings in a ripple pattern. "They are not on par with me." The growl in the back of his throat was getting harder to suppress, but he managed to pull his eyes away from those. He was about to speak when he sensed the approach of another presence. The younger Uchiha kept staring at him as if bored, but he and the man with the Rinnegan eyes both turned to the doorway and waited. Shortly afterward, a whirling commotion in the atmosphere seemed to cough out a man who, based on his appearance, was trying to run on air. He hurriedly lifted his hand and pointed with a finger at the sky before he fell face first to the ground. "Did you feel that? Because I don't think it's going to happen again." Again, he restrained himself, resisting the impulse to roll his eyes and moan. It was a good subordinate, this young man. Unfortunately, there is more room for improvement in his personality. "Indeed I did. Now that he has revealed himself, it is time to begin setting our plans into motion." "Were you able to pinpoint his location?" He waited for a response, and as the silence drew on, his icy gaze grew hotter. With his right elbow resting on the armrest and his middle and index fingers rubbing his temple, he reclined in his chair. His fingers tapped impatiently on the wood as he placed his left hand on top of the opposite armrest. "Well? Explain yourselves." His left hand balled into a fist, slammed against the armrest, and shattered the wood into pieces when none of them reacted. Now, with a nervous laugh, the man who had just entered the room began to scratch at the back of his neck. He could almost see his foolish smile through his orange swirl mask. He chose to ignore the least mature of his lackeys, instead concentrating on the man with the orange spiky hair who was covered in various piercings. "My apologies, Madara-sama, but because of the immense Yuki it had, it blanketed a wide area which made it impossible to determine where he is." He gave a long sigh. Even though he was eager to meet that individual, He recognized that a precise fix on him would be impossible due to the large number of Yuki spread out over such a large area. However, we were able to determine his nature via his Yuki signatures. Then what are you waiting for? Find him. He raised an eyebrow in question when none of the three moved or answered. The man wearing the mask spoke this time. Madara-sama. Old man. The problem is that he's a Jinchuriki. I know it would be easy to find all 9 of them, but the villages won't be too happy about us barging in and roughing them up, not to mention the serious damage we're going to do on their properties. Hey. There are only 9 Jinchurikis, don't tell me you weren't able to determine which one he is. Uchiha, bored, answered in a monotone this time. We couldn't figure it out. There was another Yuki that was mixed in, and it was clashing violently with the Bijus. Unfortunately, we don't know what kind of Yuki it was. Without displaying the slight concern he was feeling, he closed his eyes and thought for a while. It is uncommon for a Yuki to be strong enough to engage in combat with a Biju. This could either be a problem or a huge prize. Depending on the circumstances, he looked at them, devised a plan, and calmly ordered them to do something. Nagato, I want you to mobilize Akatsuki. We'll be setting our plan in motion soon, but that unknown Yuki might present a bit of an obstacle. Have them gather information on all the Jinchurikis. I want to know where they are exactly and how strong they are. Nagato started to speak, but Madara interrupted him with a hand gesture. Have them do errands or whatever they want, as long as they are able to collect the information that I need. Obito, I want you to go back to Kiri and see if you can reconnect with your old ties there. That Yagura. Obito's anxious laughter interrupted him. Yeah, see, the thing Isai may or may not have caused an incident in Kiri to happen. Madara tried to speak after blinking at him several times. However, Obito interrupted him before he could say anything more. And Yagura may or may not be dead. I'm not 100% on that, but I'm pretty sure I left him with his stomach cut wide open and his Biju running amok somewhere. He squeezed the bridge of his nose and closed his eyes, trying to control his annoyance. He would simply never be able to comprehend some aspects of Obito. Then at least try to see if we can have control of Kiri again. If not, try and find a different village. We're going to need lots of connections and all the information we can get. I don't want anything to blow up in my face once we begin to move. They both nodded in agreement, and he waved his hand to dismiss them. Until they vanished, he watched them go through the doorway. He controlled his thoughts and continued to stare at the open door. He has been waiting for him to show up for years. He raised disciples of a kind and instructed them to assemble their own followers. Whether their allegiances were bought with promises of cash, slaughter, or even devastation didn't matter to him. This world was only a tiny portion of his larger plan. He stayed motionless as a statue the entire time, so engrossed in his thoughts that he forgot all about the young Uchiha. Before he spoke, he was even more silent than a single person. What about me? He glanced at the man, trying to think of something he could do for him other than his usual Akatsuki duties. He came up with one, issued the command, and waved his hand to dismiss him. Try to keep Obito from getting too much in contact with the other Akatsuki members. Have Kisame help out, as he is also acquainted with him. Only hell is safe when that man decides to have some fun and mess around. The young Uchiha nodded slightly and slipped out of the room without a word. You really are a very helpful tool, Uchiha Itachi. He lifted his hand, looked down at it, and gestured toward the door. He summoned the Yuki imprisoned within his body by channeling his chakra. He snapped his fingers, causing the area surrounding the door to bend and distort until it slammed. He clenched his jaws and watched his hand tremble and begin to age before his very eyes. Within seconds, his hand had dried up and transformed into an ancient creature's hand. However, his hand gradually regained its powerful state as his chakra healed. He got up and turned around. Shaking off the fatigue from it, he saw tiny lights dart across the trunk of the big tree and toward the tendrils that attached to his back. Placing his palm on the wood, he grinned as he felt the giant tree's chakra move through his body, eventually passing through the tendrils and gradually replenishing his own supplies. Nearly, I will soon regain my strength and be capable of assuming his position of authority. One step closer to everything, so close. Finish flash. He was still standing when he woke up, sweating and gasping. He tried to calm himself by looking around him, but what he saw only made him more disturbed because his mind was still reeling from the images of that upsetting dream. Now the eyes of everyone else were awake and staring at him. He was uneasy because they were no longer in a trance and their eyes were filled with emotions. Some appeared eager, some determined, some afraid, and the rest were lifeless, seemingly accepting their fate. He felt as though they were anticipating something from him, but he wasn't sure how or why. Then he was struck by a dizzy spell that cleared his mind while also making his thoughts hazy. He had a thought in that moment of confused clarity, and before he knew it, he had spoken the words. Reality is in danger, and he was flung into another dimension, returning to his life as a drifter, and the great emptiness vanished. He waited until the end of their allotted time. He left his position behind the tree just as the fourth vanished in a flash. As though going to sleep, he watched in awe as the life from the little clearing gradually vanished. Either the spell had worn off or the sudden loss of focus brought on by that flash had broken it. With a shrug, he moved on toward his two pupils. He already had a speech prepared for the blonde, but given his unpredictable nature, the plans didn't matter as he was thrown to the ground. "Iruka-sensei. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Are you okay? I saw that Teme blow you up and I just lost it. And Thina and then EI." He felt both astonished and concerned. He had never witnessed the blonde struggle so much to explain what he had done that he was practically choking on his words. He's that consumed by guilt and horror for his actions, huh? He ruffled the blonde's hair and put a hand on top of his head. "It's okay Naruto, as you can see, I'm all healed up. I'm a little bit close to a dangerous level of low in chakra and Yuki, and my body's going to be aching a whole lot tomorrow, but aside from that, I'm feeling good." The blonde got up, brushed himself off, and began to smile. Naruto instantly started telling stories as soon as Iruka stood up again. Iruka began to consider ways to silence the boy because he was not feeling well and wanted to get some rest as soon as possible. He let out a sigh and concluded that the speech was no longer important before he reached up and untied his Hite-8. He waited until Naruto turned around and began discussing Hinata's assistance before turning to face Naruto. He smiled at the Hyuga heiress in gratitude. His impish side came out just as he was ready to put the plaited cloth around the blonde's forehead. He put a foot on the small of the blonde's back and shoved him to the ground while grinning mischievously. "Hey, what are you doing, Iruka-sensei?" Iruka struggled to tie the forehead protector around the child's forehead while he squirmed and screamed while she sat on top of him. When he was successful, he put the boy in a headlock, ruffled his hair, and then let him stand up. He laughed so hard at the murderous glare the short kid gave him that he thought his wounds, which had already healed, would have reopened once he had himself under control. He tapped the Hite-8's metal plate on his forehead and grinned at the blonde. "Congratulations Naruto. For beating down a Chunin and completing the trials, you have earned the right and privilege to pass the academy." Naruto was speechless and unable to comprehend the situation. Because of all the excitement, he had forgotten that he had not graduated, and now that he was reminded of it, he had just received his diploma. It took him a while to realize that he should be happy because he was so overwhelmed. Grinning broadly, he snatched Hinata and jumped at Iruka, slapping them both together in a hug and spouting praise. Iruka swiftly and violently yanked Naruto off, aware of the reddening Hyuga heiress and the fact that she appeared to be about to pass out. "Hey, no need to thank us. This happened because of you, Naruto. Congratulations." He grinned again and then recalled something. "I gotta tell Gramps." Naruto dashed into the woods without a word, but before he could get out of the clearing, he came to a complete stop and turned around, scratching the back of his neck and laughing sheepishly. "What's wrong Naruto? Hey, maybe I should get Hinata-chan back to her house first." Iruka gestured for the Hyuga heiress to begin walking after shaking his head. "Come on, let's both get her back home, then you can go ahead and try to bother the Hokage." Iruka began to turn his shoulders as he was walking, thinking that Naruto's graduation would bring him one step closer to a restful night's sleep. On the other hand, Naruto had another idea. Iruka couldn't help but think of his life goal and how he was getting closer to it when he addressed his grandfather as Hokage. He felt as though he could handle anything that came after this terrible first step, even though he was still a long way off. The young Hyuga heiress had woken up earlier that morning with a strange sense of excitement about her Daya and her entire life. For once, she was not bothered by her family's icy gazes or their hateful glares. She was beaming broadly as she went about her business inside the Hyuga compound, her mind focused on the fact that she had been granted what she believes to be a special invitation into Naruto's private life. When she recalls how his father, the fourth Hokage, would gaze at the two of them with a kind smile and a knowing look in his eyes, all of her anger and sadness about the terrible things the boy was forced to go through vanishes. However, that brief, joyful moment when she and Naruto locked eyes and it seemed like the entire world stopped overshadows even that memory. She was in a joyful daze during her morning routines and her walk to the academy because she kept replaying that moment in her mind. "I've been introduced into Naruto's life, and now I'm a part of it, not to mention his father, the fourth Hokage Konoha's yellow flash. He asked me to take care of him." As she arrived at their classroom, she let out a satisfied sigh. Taking a few deep breaths, she attempted to keep her emotions in check and walk with the dignity of a true Hyuga, but she finally failed when she smiled and her step skipped. So much for being a true Hyuga. She made her way to the back of the class and took a seat. She began to remember everything from last night, grinning as Naruto entered the room as though he owned it. She observed him as he began boasting that he was now a real ninja when Kiba confronted him about it, claiming that he had failed the final exams. She wanted to butt in, but Naruto handled everything as usual. If his furrowed brows were any indication, he was looking around the room. With great effort he greeted Hinata with a broad smile before rushing to the seat beside her. "Hey Hinata-chan, good morning, and Naruto-kuna." She nodded slightly to him, then glanced down at her twitchy fingers. After what they had experienced the night before, she felt like blushing and began to curse herself for continuing to act in this manner. When their teacher, Iruka, entered and began introducing their new teams, she was still lecturing herself. "Maybe Naruto and I'll be in the same team." The sound of Iruka calling out Naruto's name stopped her from smiling. "Team 7 is Naruto, Sakura and Sasuke." She glanced at Naruto, who sighed and shrugged. "Oh well, I guess life just isn't that easy." Naruto kept her from getting bored while they waited for their senseis to arrive by explaining some of his prank ideas in detail. She waved and smiled at the blonde before heading out. When Yuhi Kurenai, their new sensei, arrived to pick them up, she laughed when she saw Naruto pouting when she turned around right before they left the room. "It might not be that easy, but at least I could say that I took a step in the right direction." He shifted around in his seat, attempting to relax. The lone girl in the room beat him to it just as he was about to yell. "Where the heck is he?" Her shouting made his ears ring, and he winced when the door opened and someone poked his head inside the room. He began to wonder how she could do something like leave a ringing in his ears while she was shouting at a volume that everyone else uses. "Yo!" Naruto prepared to yell again, but he covered his ears when he noticed Sakura doing the same. "Where have you been? It's been 3 hours." When she finished, Naruto took his hands off his ears and was shocked to discover that she could still make them ring a little. However, when he noticed their new sensei's eye smile twitching, his surprise turned to satisfaction. The man gave a headshake and then gave them a bored look. "First impression, I don't like you." After saying it in a deadpan manner, he turned upbeat and told them to meet him on the roof in a short while before vanishing in a flurry of leaves. As he headed for the roof, Naruto could only scratch his head in bewilderment, wondering if their sensei was mentally ill and if the other Junin were the same. Hinata sat down and leaned on a tree, breathing heavily. To check if it was okay for her to take a break, she opened one eye to glance at her teammates. She saw Akamaru lying face down on top of Kiba, who was lying spread-eagled on the ground, both of them panting heavily. Glancing around, she noticed Shino standing with one hand on a tree and their back to them. When she saw how his knees were trembling, almost giving way, and how his shoulders were bouncing up and down in a brief, rapid rhythm, she began to question how he could still be standing as if he wasn't even breathing a little. When she discovered that even Shino was exhausted and struggling to breathe, and that he was actually leaning on the tree to keep himself upright, she allowed herself a tiny smile. She noticed a slight change in the air and turned to face the tree across from her, where their Junin sensei appeared. "Well, do you think you can make do with a female teacher now?" She was smiling, but her tone was serious and her voice was harsh. Hinata smiled when she winked at her. Kiba raised his arm, hand closed except for the thumb pointing up, without even opening his eyes or looking up. It was only a moment before he let it drop back to the floor, apparently so breathless that he had his bugs form. "The word, affirmative, in the air," Shino said. She turned to face Kurenai again and couldn't help but smile when she noticed that she was grinning smugly. To the best of her knowledge, she rarely acted in that manner. It seems that she took some pleasure in disproving sexist statements. "Alright, now that that's out of the way, I want you to meet me here tomorrow morning for your final test to see if I should take you on as my full-time genin team." In between breaths, Kiba wheezed, "What? Buddha, we already finished the genin test." The biggest smile Hinata had ever seen was Kurenai's. "That's just the test to see if you have the potential to be genin. After that, your new Junin sensei will be giving you another test to see if you can survive being genin." "Buddha, what about the test we just had? Doesn't that account?" "What are you talking about? That was your test for me to see if I'm a good enough kunoichi to be your teacher, right? So I still have my test to see if I'll be keeping you as my team, or sending you back to the academy." Her final words floated around them as she nodded once and vanished in a shimmer when no one responded. "Now that that's clear, I'll be seeing you tomorrow." Silence gradually grew as they all managed their breathing. After a few minutes of panting, Shino exhaled a soothing breath and turned to face them. "I shall be seeing you tomorrow. Until then." He turned around and walked away after giving them a little bow of the head. Kiba sat up and huffed a little with a long sigh. He got up and dusted himself off with his characteristic savage grin. He turned to face Hinata. "See you tomorrow, then." He winked at her before turning to leave, Akamaru skipping at his heels. However, he made a brief remark that nearly made Hinata laugh before he could leave earshot. "Akamaru, I blame you for all of this." Hinata smiled slightly and thought to herself, "Funny, that's not how I remember it." Before departing the training area, she cleaned herself up and took a final whiff of the forest air, wondering where Naruto might be and what he might be doing at that precise moment. The smiling genjutsu mistress in the center of the training area, reflecting on the last exercise, was never seen by any of them. Flashback: she took them to one of the training grounds. As soon as Kurenai picked them up, she turned to face them and calmly and kindly introduced herself. "Hello Team 8, my name is Yuhi Kurenai, and I'll be your Junin sensei." At that moment, Kiba let out a loud groan, which caused her to raise an eyebrow in inquiry. "Is there something wrong? I don't like being bossed around by my mom or my sister, so why should I take being bossed around by you?" His attitude made her eye twitch, but she made an effort to remain composed. Placing a student from her first team in the hospital for mental trauma would be detrimental to her record. "I don't like bragging about my credentials, but I'll have you know that I am a qualified kunoichi with Junin rank, and a highly accomplished genjutsu specialist." Instead, the boy just snorted, unimpressed. "So? My mom's a Junin and combat specialist. As well as clan head, she was also the best tracker that Konoha has ever had. My sister may be a Chunin, but she's a recognized vet both in the ninja and civilian circle. Am I supposed to be impressed with you just because you're one of the few girls that got to Junin?" She simply detested that type of conversation, and for some reason, his remark struck her as sexist. "I think someone needs to be taught who the alpha is around here, so how about we have a little test? You three have unique talents that allow you to become an excellent tracker team, so why don't we play around with your strengths? You have 3 hours to try and track me down. We'll restrict this exercise to this entire training ground, so hunting down the little girly me wouldn't be that hard for you, isn't that right, boy?" He became agitated at the boy's comment and growled at the challenge. Hinata glanced at Shino, who merely shrugged his shoulders and nodded to Kurenai, indicating that he would be participating in the exercise. As Shino let go of his swarm, she noticed the girl sigh in defeat and began going through the hand seals to activate her Byakugan. "We're going to have to work on that later." Kiba pulled her out of her planning. "Well, you better start running then." She smirked at him, and then her whole body began to glow. "Boy, are you blind? I'm already gone." She left her spot to finish her trick after she was certain the illusion had been created. She was aware that the illusion would not last long because Hinata's Byakugan could see through it and Shino's bugs could disrupt his chakra to cancel it. However, the brief window of opportunity that was created by Shino releasing his entire swarm and Hinata using hand seals to activate her Byakugan was more than enough time for a swift escape. She grinned to herself as she heard Kiba's irate yelling, Hinata's little gasp, and the buzzing of an irritated Shino's swarm. The end of the flashback. Aside from some weakness when their senses are being manipulated, they're a good unit for tracking and recon missions. A little more training in combat, then I could mold them into a top-notch hunter team. She got up and brushed herself off, wondering what exercises and activities she could use to best train her new team for their individual skills. He glanced up from his book, then quickly returned to reading, covering the movement with a giggle and a closed eye. It would have appeared to an untrained eye that he had not even noticed the arrival of the three would be genin to be obnoxious. He read and laughed a little more while waiting for one of the children to lose it for several more minutes. He continued the act, only pausing when he heard the blonde child growl. He snapped the book shut and turned to them. "Oh, you're here, go on. Sit anywhere you like, make yourselves comfortable." He got right to the point when they were all seated. "So, why don't we introduce ourselves first? Likes, dislikes, dreams, and of course your names. Let's see, how about we start with pink hair?" He sighed as pink hair simply blinked at him a few times. This was supposed to be top kunoichi? Before being recognized, the blonde child beside her held up his hand and spoke. "Why don't you start?" He gave his customary nonchalant response while shrugging his shoulders. "Name is Hitaki Kakashi. Likes. Well, I dislike telling people about me in dreams. It's a secret." In case the three missed it, he made sure his visible eye would convey his expression by smiling from beneath his mask. Pink hair was the one who held up her hand this time. Sensei? All we got was your name?" As he answered, his expression and smile remained constant. So you're next, pink hair?" She simply blinked at him once more, which caused her to sigh once more. He chose to try with someone else and put pink hair out of his mind for the time being. He gave the blonde a nod. "How about you, blondie? Wanna go up first?" The blonde jumped up and turned up the volume, causing his ears to twitch. "My name is Uzumaki Naruto a Datbeo, a verbal tick? Hoo-ha? My likes are figuring out enigmas, pranking, and training. Ramen doesn't count because I don't like it. I love the stuff. I don't like stuck-up people who think they're better than everyone else, especially those that harms innocent people. And my dream, well, everyone already knows it, but I like repeating it anyway. So yeah, my dream is to be one day be Hokage, and then become the greatest Kage in the entire world, believe it." There was silence for a few seconds before the silver-haired Junin chose to finish his obnoxious persona with a slow clap, but in his mind, he was thinking that Naruto had a really good dream and that, if he ever kept them, he should probably use his prankish energy for something more important. Well, that was fun, pink hair. You're up. Before beginning one of the most annoying and ear-splitting introductions he has ever had the misfortune of hearing, the girl coughed into her fist, obviously clearing her throat. My name is Haruno Sakura, my likes area Kaya. My dream Isasai and my dislike Isa Naruto. Kakashi did his best to control his twitching eye while fighting to maintain his eye smile. The girl is a serious fangirl, and what is with that deafening screeching? It was easier for him to maintain his composure when he turned to face the other two men in the group and saw how uncomfortable they were, especially Naruto. Okay then, Mr. Dark and Gloomy, it's your turn. To the man's amusement, this caused the boy to frown and turn away. He wasn't sure if the children could see it, but his smile widened. It didn't matter, he decided. My name is Uchiha Sasuke. I like training and learning new techniques. Dislikes? I have a lot, but on the top of the list are weaklings and fangirls. The Junin, never one to pass up a chance, chose to take advantage of the one offered by the Uchiha in order to eliminate Sakura's fangirl behavior. What about a weak fangirl? This caused the boy to stare intently into his eyes. Doubly so, as they are useless in helping me to achieve my goal. He could see that coldness was there, just waiting to form, as he looked into those dark eyes. I don't think he's even awakened his Sharingan yet, and he's already displaying such a dangerous mental state. However, he kept the boy talking without letting his anxiety show in his tone or face. And your dream? I don't have a dream, but a few objectives to get stronger and to rebuild my clan, while my ultimate goal is to kill a certain man. He stared at the Uchiha for a moment, storing in his mind the murderous expression on his face. They do have the potential to become real genin, he concluded, but based on his observations of them, he is unsure if they will be able to pass his test. He nodded once to indicate that he had made up his mind, and then he started to speak, but a low growl interrupted him. The blonde appeared to be controlling his anger, based on his appearance. Well, looks like these guys won't be passing my test anytime soon. Okay. Now that we know each other a bit, I want you all to meet me at training ground 7 in the morning. Don't eat breakfast, as you might throw up. He spoke in a positive tone throughout. Just before he left, he thought of one more thing to remind the recent graduates. He switched from his typical carefree smile to a more somber and murderous glare because he wanted to further fuck the three. Oh. And don't any of you dare to be late. He resumed his smile and waved goodbye before vanishing in a whirl of leaves. After the three flinched, swallowed, and nodded. I love messing with the newbies.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.